we are recording.
Okay, excellent. All right, it is July 18th, and we are convening the meeting that was supposed to be held on July 10th, but was canceled due to the storms and the flooding. It is July 18th at 8:10. This is the Vermont Community Broadband Board meeting for July. And I'm going to do a roll call. We have all board members here. We have Brian, Dan, Holly, Laura, and myself, Patty. For staff, Christine, do you want to run down staff?
Sure, happy
Staff
to.
list?
Yep, we've got, and I'd like to introduce two new staff members too. Somebody's driving, so it's maybe commute. I don't know. Anyway, I'll keep talking even though it's we got a lot of there we go. Thank you. We have Chance Payette. Chance just started this week. He's our administrative assistant with an extensive background in cybersecurity. We've got Rob Fish, Tony Clitheroe, Heron Herzog, Alyssa Matthews, Lucy Rogers, and Brittany Watson, our digital equity officer, and Stephen Zubkoff, who's our financial person. And also from the PSD, Hunter Thompson is joining us as well. We've been working closely with Hunter on telecom. He's the telecom manager for PSD.
Excellent. Welcome all new staff members. Sounds like a full roll call there. Great to have all the positions staffed up. First item on our agenda is approval of the agenda. And I am actually operating from the original agenda that came out for the July 10th meeting. Has the agenda changed, Christine? Can you highlight what's changed?
No, the agenda has not changed. In fact, I want to make a correction. There weren't a lot of changes. The only change that came in was a result of the accountability policy coming in late. So we were not able to add that to the board packet about accountability policy. But the agenda is the same.
Okay, so I'm gonna use the agenda from July 10th, and any additional material is apparently in the new packet.
Oh, hang on there. I want to correct that. We had adjusted the agenda for the new start time, but the actual schedule of the agenda did not change.
And are there any other items on the agenda that have changed?
Rob, can you just check that if we changed anything on the agenda in terms of the order?
I don't believe so. You have the agenda right there too, Christine. I'm sorry.
Yeah, no, I don't say no. Okay, there were no changes, Patty. You and I agree.
So I'm just gonna, because I'm all loaded up with the existing packet, I'm just gonna use that.
That will be fine.
Okay.
That would, just to make it clear to the rest of the board, when Patty and I set the agenda, we don't change it afterwards.
All right. Holly, did you have comments on the agenda?
I don't have comments on the agenda, but Patty, well, wait a second. My comment on the agenda is this. I would like to add an item about ex parte communications and additional information coming into the board prior to a meeting. I just think we need a moment to talk about that factor, because I think people are expecting that we're checking our email at the VCBB daily and that we can add information. We got at least one, if not two, letters from CUDs about materials that are or are not on the agenda.
All right, Holly, before we jump into it, let's figure out where we put that item for discussion, and then we'll jump into the details.
Okay, I just thought we could talk about it briefly here so that we knew what we were actually including in today's conversation.
All right, let's move that as an agenda item as 1.1. So immediately after our item 1 on the agenda. So we are going to take up an item called ex parte communication. All right, that agenda item is up for discussion. Continue on, Holly.
So thank you for that. And I'm a couple of things here. On the one hand, I would like to know, Patty, I would like your guidance on what we're supposed to be considering in the scope of this meeting, because when people are sending us direct information, I don't know if it's been through staff. I don't know if it's part of an agenda item. And so I'd just like your guidance on whether or not those items should be considered by board members in our conversation. And the second item that's related to this is, in today's conversation about policy, I know everyone is eager to add information, but you know, the VCBB board does not have the luxury or the leisure to meet and have a big conversation about policy. So I believe that Laura and I had agreed that and hoped that, Patty, you would lead us through one round of conversation about policy matters without additional information and feedback, and then we could hear additional information and feedback.
All right, so let's take the issue of information coming up outside the board packet. Let's take some discussion on that. I agree with Holly that I certainly don't check my VCBB email on a daily basis. What I do right before the board meeting is scan the emails that look to be substantive, and I'll peruse those and read those. Generally, as a general rule, and I'm thinking out loud, which is always dangerous. As a general rule, I would be hesitant to take material after the board packet has been issued, but there are things that pop up that are substantive that we may want to consider, that are important to inform us in a policy matter. Generally, what happens is Christine or whoever will say, hey, check your email. There's something important to read. And as long as we've done that and we're all in agreement to consider it, then it can come up. But if board members haven't read it, then I think it's fair play to push that particular item off the list of things to talk about. So I'll open it up with that position.
I think what that
Chris.
does, I think that what that does say, Patty, is that the information we're considering is in the board packet unless staff have, Christine in particular, has asked us to review it.
Exactly. Christine, you have your hand up?
Yeah, I just think, you know, let's get some good clarity as we come out of this, because to this, you know, we do share things with the CUDs. For example, the accountability policy we did share with the CUDs, and which might be driving this conversation. But if we decide, you know, so we send the packet out on the Tuesday before the board meeting. If we decide to lock everything in at that point, then anything that comes in afterwards will not be considered in that meeting. And that would apply to things that come in from the board as well. You know, so it's
No.
Well, I just don't know how we can have a public meeting with a fairly warned agenda if we don't share it. You know, so the dilemma that I'm struggling with is we have an obligation for under open meeting law, and so I want you to make sure you, as a board, you discuss that as part of your discussion of how that works.
So Christine, I'm wondering this, you know, sometimes there are presentations in the course of the open meeting itself. Those presentations are not circulated in advance. How do we reconcile that?
Say that again. Sorry.
So if we can only consider materials that are in the board packet, there are presentations that come to us in the course of the meeting that are not part of the packet. We gain information all the time that is relevant but not part of the packet. So I'm just saying there is an anomaly here.
Yeah, I think anomaly works all around, right?
Well, I think it works because if it's in the public meeting, it's part of the public meeting. It doesn't have to be in the board packet to be part of a public meeting. I'm really talking about what is the board responsible for considering.
Okay, I'll wait here. I mean, I don't know the answer to that, so I'll just wait to hear. This is a board decision, so
All right, so this is really a Robert's Rule of Orders issue. I'm not up to date on the latest and greatest in that particular item. Let me look up Robert's Rules of Order to see what is said there for consideration, and let's come back to it.
That's great.
Laura, do you have a comment?
Yeah, just I think I've made this comment before. You know, that we're in a pretty dynamic environment, continue to be in a pretty dynamic environment. And, you know, certainly we need to hear back from the entities that we are supporting. And so this is a request that we return to scheduling twice a month meetings. And if we find that the second meeting is not necessary, we cancel it.
All right, so Laura has proposed that we move back to twice a month meetings. Is there discussion on that? Brian?
Yeah, Patty, I just, the work fills the time. And so just because we have more time doesn't mean we're going to get more work done. I'm more a fan of like productive time, productive meetings, and making sure we're like crisp and clean. All of that requires preparation materials, pre-reading of materials, making sure that the materials are available to the appropriate parties with enough lead time for them to ingest them. And so there's nothing I'm seeing that would require going back to twice a month. I think if we keep once a month, and if we are flexible on a special meeting here or there to fill in a gap, I think we're good.
Thank you. Dan, you had your hand up?
I effectively echo that. If we went to additional meetings, I would ask that we keep them to an hour to an hour and a half. That means we're specific topics to hit on a particular item, and we close that out. The 4-hour blocks are very difficult to clear.
All right, I just for the complete the conversation, I'm of the same mindset. Happy to have extra meetings as necessary and keep them to a limited time frame because everyone's time is full. Holly?
I'm betwixt and between. I mean, I think being flexible enough to schedule an occasional special meeting is enough. And that actually what I'm concerned about here is the pelting of the board members with additional information, whether it's urgent or not.
Okay,
I
thank
want
you.
to avoid that.
All right, Laura, and then I'll go to Christine.
Yeah, I guess I would agree with everything that each one of my fellow board members have said, and would still say, I don't think we're in a place, I think we're in a place where we should be scheduling twice a month meetings. I don't think we are far enough in advance of materials. I don't think we have things coming out in a timely, comprehensive fashion. I don't think we have enough time for back and forth with the VCBB, with the CUDs and our staff and the board. So perhaps that's something that is evolving, and I'm willing to put this down, but I do not think we're there where one meeting a month is working exceptionally well. So that's it.
Okay. Christine?
What are we not getting to? That's what I want to know. Like, what are we dropping the ball on?
So these policies, I don't know, they're, they're probably 6 months, 9 months late. We
2 years
have,
late, Laura, I agree.
well, I think there's a lot of things. And so, like this, that we are not having time to do. I think we are getting materials that are done from staff that have been submitted that we have not had the time to review or provide feedback on. And, we are hearing from staff that they are existing in an extremely dynamic and pressure environment. And so it just feels like there's not enough time for proper kind of process to happen. That's my reaction. That's what I am responding to, Brian. I certainly don't need more things to do.
So can I ask something of you, Laura, and maybe Brian can help orient us on this thought. It seems what you're saying is the board is in a position where it's reactive to whatever's put in front of it instead of leading, because we don't have the opportunity to talk.
Yes.
So, it's one thing for us to review, for example, the BEAD document, but we haven't had a discussion of what the policy issues are that are inherent in the BEAD document, and we don't have an opportunity to guide or determine where that fits in for us. We're just looking at the BEAD document. That's a simple example. And there's no, when you look at I don't know, what is it, a 60 or 90 page document, how do you even digest it really in terms
So-
of what's important? But I'm only giving that one example because there isn't enough time in this meeting to do any kind of discussion.
Yeah, I want to jump in. I think there are, the policy discussion that we're going to have today, that started from the auditor's report that's moving us to get our policy ship in order, is important, and it is going to take 6 to 9 months. I think that is the lay of the land ahead of us, that we have a bunch of work to do on policies. And hopefully Holly can still hear me.
I'm sorry.
don't-
Yeah, I
okay.
can hear you. I'm
I
trying
think as-
desperately to print something out.
Okay, I think as board members, it's important for us to remember our lanes of what our responsibilities are. Policies and approval of policies squarely is in our lap and in our lane to take up. I think BEAD reports, I skimmed the BEAD report. I don't think that's my job as a board member to read every word of that and digest it. That's staff's role.
There's a lot of policy embedded in the report, though.
So, okay, we'll let that set. At the
I
same time,
concur.
at the
with
same
Holly.
time, at the same time, we can't hold up staff from pursuing grants and pursuing initiatives that are super important to the state. And I would, rather than wait for perfection and get all our policies in place, we got to let staff run with the show so that they can get things done and get funds into the state and pursue BEAD and pursue other things. So we're in this difficult situation where we're starting to ramp up on policies. That's clearly a board assignment, it's clearly a board role. At the same time, we can't halt work of staff, and they got to keep going. So rather than hold up the greater good for perfection, I think that we got to swallow hard and let things to some degree run its course. That's kind of the attitude that I have.
Yeah, Patty, can I jump in?
Absolutely.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's what we've been doing. And, I think we have been fortunate enough to have some pretty talented folks working for us, but I also think that we have been surprised and we are behind on some policies. And
Mhm.
so again, I'm not looking for extra things to do or to micromanage. I think that this board needs additional information and time to talk about policy. So I do think I will just keep coming back with the broken record. I think we should be scheduling every other week, and if we don't need the meeting, then we cancel it. And I understand, Brian, that, we set this time aside, we'll set time to fill it, let's put some parameters in it, but we're taking a lot of time right now on a pretty tightly packed agenda to have a board discussion because we don't have time to have board discussions about our function and our processes.
Laura, would it help that if we get through the accountability policy, the work that you and Holly have done, and then talk at the end of that? Because I think you have put a great document together. And that may help drive us in the policy dimension. It'll help sort
Sure.
out it'll help sort out how many extra meetings we need, the immediacy of those meetings.
So these are policies on accountability and how we're going to be accountable for funding. I think more what I'm talking about is process. And that I don't know that we have enough time to make sure that we are doing good process with the dynamic atmosphere that we have going on here. And the, incredible additional amount of funding that is coming into the state. So.
Okay, Dan?
May I suggest that, and I agree with Laura in the aspect that there are some elements here that are moving along quickly. I think the policies are important. I don't think to keep this moving that we need to have all the board members doing all the heavy lifting. And I really appreciate the work that's been done. Notably, that it's like there's a really good work that's there. Appreciate it, but we need to keep moving. I think we need to keep moving that along. And if it means 1 hour meeting once a week, 3 of us or 4 of us, but we can't always all be there. But as long as that ball keeps rolling forward and we're making progress, in the end, at these larger sessions, we will vote and approve or make a more formal movement of those policies. And I see Laura shaking her head. So it's a public, it's law that we've, 3 of us get together. Now it's a public meeting. And if it's 3 of us that are sitting together, then fine, it's 3 for an hour, meeting those requirements, moving those policies ahead, but then it comes back to the larger group for deeper discussion and approval. But putting the meat on the bones might take that effort in like 1 hour stints. I hope that's helpful or productive in this particular topic. And I have
Thank
one
you,
item that
Dan.
I'd like to discuss.
Thank you, Dan.
Okay, I'd like, while I have this, just for full disclosure, it's an item for the agenda. It's come to my attention, there are some safety concerns in construction. There's a lot of workforce out there. I'm not sure they're all up to speed on training of safety events and such, and I just have a concern. It's come to my attention, and I think that the staff should coordinate with VCUDA and the CUDs to help bring about a safe workforce, perhaps aligning workforce training for safety purposes, proper flagging, handling of material, control of conductors, things like that. And I know that all sounds fundamental, but perhaps Christine could put that in the parking lot as a follow-up item. And I just want everybody to be aware that I think that should go in the parking lot, and I'll follow up with Christine later on the details, if that's okay with everyone.
All right, thank you. Brian, do you have any thoughts? Any additional thoughts? I think what Dan laid out, and that certainly to me addresses Laura's concerns, if we can do some subcommittees around individual policies, and then move forward any action items at a full board meeting. I think that will work. I don't see any problem in that. We certainly can form some committees. The issue is folks' time and whether they have the time to put into it. You, Laura and Holly, did a tremendous amount of work on this accountability policy, and whatever other policies we dream up, it's a function of how much time we can put into it.
So can I make a suggestion that before the board adjourns, that we have a standing parking lot item of whether or not an item or issue has arisen at the meeting that requires a follow-up meeting by a subcommittee? And if we institute that practice, then perhaps we put a ghost meeting in our calendars for a particular time every week or every other week, but we decide at the public meeting whether or not there is an item for carryover.
That's an excellent proposal. What do others think? All right, let's do it. I see all head nodding. All right. Are we good?
Yeah, look, I've got my hand up. I just
Oh,
wanted
I'm
to.
sorry, Christine. Go ahead.
Yeah, first of all, Dan, thank you for bringing up the safety issues. I am equally concerned, and it'll be on the parking lot, and I will follow up for sure. I think that's something we should always be concerned about because especially when people are under pressure for construction. But I just wanted to start with the opening question, and I really appreciate this discussion. Thank you, because you know we're all trying to figure this out as well. But so the issue around materials, let me just repeat back what I think I heard. First of all, you know, on Tuesday, the agenda will be locked, you know, the packet will go out. But if there are any changes, Patty and I will discuss those and we'll notify the board through text if there are changes that occur. So I got that. The only thing caveat I want to say to this is, you know, you may get random emails that are out of our control, right, from the public, that are a result of that agenda packet being posted. So we don't necessarily have control over that. Sometimes we get emails directed to us for the board. You know, I guess I'm looking for direction whether we should forward those to the board or just hold them.
But I think you can forward those to the board, but they also can come in as public comment.
Yeah.
Yeah, all right.
It doesn't mean we're going to take an action on anything. It's, you know, we have a public comment section and somebody can come into the public comment and said, hey, I sent you an email, please review. I have summarized the issue and we can review it. Doesn't mean the board's going to take action on that.
Yeah, and actually we can that's a good response. I think when that comes in, we'll say, look, bring this up during public comment session. And we will share it with the board to give you a heads up, but we will give people feedback to make sure that they do that in public comment.
Okay.
Half the reason to have this conversation is to let particularly CUDs and others know that we're not just taking everyone's information in all the time for deliberation. Every letter is not on the agenda.
Okay. Are we wrapped up? All right, let's move along. First item on the agenda after this discussion is item 2, approval of the June 12th meeting minutes. I did not see the meeting minutes in the agenda, so we're going to table that. We'll put them in for the next month. Okay, Christine?
Yeah, yes, yes.
Okay. That moves us to item 3, accountability policy for grants. Holly and Laura have done a ton of work on this, and we have their table. Pull that up. I don't know what date it was, but we have their information in table that was provided on July 12th, 2023. We'd like to have them go through and review this. I'd like just to kick it off that this is the intent of this is to get our house in order. We've talked about this a few times after the auditor's report, that there were some really valuable suggestions out of the auditor's report that indicated we do need to get our house in order. And this is a big step toward doing that. This is meant to be grounding for us. This is not it's not, what's the word I'm looking for? It's not a criticism of our past efforts. It's just we now have time on the agenda and our place to move forward and get our practices refined and put into good order. So I'm not going to blabber on. I'm going to turn it over to Holly and Laura to lead us through this. Thank you very much for all of your work on this.
You're really welcome. Laura, you and I have not decided how we have a shtick here. You know, is it fair? Would you like an opening statement?
Yes,
Opportunity?
I would. I would like to say something, and then actually like to turn it over to have Holly walk us through this document. Holly, while Holly and I and Tony have met a number of times, the actual real pen to paper work Holly has done for us, and I thank you very much for that significant amount of time, Holly. So this is a question that we have. I think Patty has summed it up well. I'm not going to take a lot of time on this, but I think it's really important. We've talked about this before when when Act 71 was brought forward. There were two things that the legislature was really concerned about. One was universality, and the other was accountability. And Holly and Tony and I have focused on what's in the law, and this I think is an excellent starting place, probably not an end place. And with that, I will turn it over to Holly.
Thanks, Laura, and thank you very much for including Tony in the accolades, because she really did help structure this conversation by creating the template for this product. As you can see at the top of the document, there are policies expressly required by law and policies necessary to public interest and purpose. And the second category are policies that are assumed, hinted at, implied, or otherwise referred to in the law. And so it seems right that we discern as a board between those two things. And it's really important to me to say out loud, this is a starting point, as Laura said, and the board really doesn't have the opportunity to have a discussion about policy matters absent a public meeting. And so I don't know how the board members would like to proceed in this, but I can't think of any way other than to visit each category as we go through the table. Patty, is that acceptable? Yes, okay. So the preamble is simply some background on how this policy applies. And we don't have a standing format for policies at the VCBB. So I am offering this. If there's anything you want to comment on here, board members, I'm open to your suggestions. But probably the most important line is that the authority of the board to enact policy derives from these various sections. So it is true that when a decision of the VCBB is made regarding policy, it is the decision of this board. Gone. I'm on page 2. We're talking about payment schedule, ensuring accountability, and we incorporated in this the 8086D business plan and G sustainability requirement. Now, this is very complex stuff, and it doesn't do well in a tightly aligned and proscriptive policy that states exacting detail, because as my more technical friends have educated me, thank you, Dan, you can't set specific standards for variability in the field. So this is where we ended up with.
Holly,
Yes.
Tony has her hand up.
Oh, Tony.
Thank you. Hi, I just wanted to offer to put the policy up on the screen so the
I think that would be
people
great.
could follow along. If that's what you'd like, Holly.
So it might be great. It also makes it really hard to see other board members. So board members, if you want to do that, or is it more important for you to have a conversation? It was distributed in the board packet to everyone. In the revised board packet, right, Tony?
Yeah, I have my version up on a separate screen, so I don't need it to be shared.
No, I don't.
We're all the same? Okay.
Okay,
Okay.
great. Thank you.
Thank you,
Thank you,
Tony.
Tony.
So one of the important things here is the payout process, 30% on execution, performance payments up to 30% based on the approval of the grant manager. And then after completion of 50% of the project, so you can have 60% of the payments out, it appears. But there is up to 90% available at 50% of the project. And then 10% upon compliance and testing. I'm interested, particularly you three utility mavens. Does that sound, in your knowledge of vendor world and compliance reporting, acceptable, recognizing that this is the working capital of the CUDs? I'm seeing one slight nod.
Yeah,
it
I think
seems
that's-
reasonable.
Go ahead.
Sorry. It seems reasonable to me. I'm very interested in what, kind of CUD reaction would be, but at the highest level, this is reasonable to me, Holly.
Great.
Ditto. And the fact that we have this schedule laid out for Maple already, adopting that for everyone, I think makes a lot of sense.
Now, I'll point out that I think it should be adopted for everyone. And we have some grants that are inconsistent with this. I think we should stop I think we should stop inconsistency.
Agreed.
Okay. I'm moving on to the second category.
What I would like to do, I don't want us to vote on this today. What I'd like to do is we talk about it and say everyone can hear the board's where we're headed. And if Fukuda and any of the CUDs have concerns, objections, at the next meeting is an opportunity to hear from them. So I'm just going to put that out there.
I see that Dan has a hand up.
Dan.
I would, yes, thank you. Perhaps not here. There are other places where this can be added, but leading indicators to performance of the construction, I think, should be in play as a policy. All businesses follow generally acceptable accounting practices, and those gap rules are how auditors check upon a business. Similarly, in a construction world, there are indicators of performance, whether you're building a skyscraper, a bridge, or a fiber optic network. And I think we can put that into policy, not perhaps here, but somewhere in all of this. And I'm not suggesting making those changes. That should be taken up in a subcommittee, and we can get the details of that. But
are you saying that there is, like there are gap rules, are you saying that there's a generally accepted standard, like AIA standard or some generally accepted standard?
We would likely have to develop that, but there are plenty of business experts that we can draw upon to recognize what that should look like. And it would help the CUDs recognize how they're performing to themselves, to others. It would provide transparency to the public, and it would give us an indication of how they're doing leading up to their goals.
And it would also supply an audit basis after the fact. So it also, by the way, would supply a detail that I don't know how CUDs get this, but a detail for their construction contracts so that they can build right into the construction contracts what the benchmarks would be.
Yes.
Okay. Okay. I hear a subcommittee forming. Okay.
Exactly.
Okay.
With Dan leading.
Yeah, I'm afraid it's true,
Happy to
Dan.
help.
Great. I'm moving on to adopt industry accepted engineering standards, promoting reliability, resiliency, and interoperability. This is actually where my comments about inconsistencies in the field came in. So it's hard for us to establish specific tech standards other than the need to result in 100 by 100 square speed of the network. We chose availability requirements of just 3 nines here And I don't know how our utility, when I used to work in the cellular industry, we were talking 4 and 5 nines in terms of reliability. So I'm interested in your comments on that. And then the staff have designated outside plant design standards that are quite vague. And I understand that the standards were developed with the input of Brian and Dan. And the reason why they're categorical as opposed to prescriptive is because the field conditions change. And so these are considerations, the outside plant design standards. Any comment on this section? When there's no comment, that kind of suggests that we would adopt the policy as it stands, subject to input from others that we want to consider.
Agreed.
Sounds right.
Okay, all right. I'm moving on to number 3 on the back of page 5. I'm sorry, on page 5. Establish standards for recouping of grant funds and transferring ownership of grant-funded network assets if a grantee material fails to comply with the terms and conditions of a grant. So this is, smoke and mirrors created by legislation. Here's a hoop. How high can you jump? We're taking a shot at this. So we've broken it into 2 parts, really. The first part is recouping grant funds. And this is really about a VCBB staff determination that the terms and conditions of a grant aren't met, and a 30-day cure period. And it's really up to the VCBB to determine how much of the grant funds should be recouped. Of course, based on a recommendation of staff. But I think one of the things we need to know, and it's an item for the parking lot, is what is the process staff is following for review? I mean, we have grant manager, that's great. How are you telling whether we're at the place we need to be at and that the standards are being met? And when we say standards here, we are not just talking about whether or not it's 144 strands in the fiber and the availability was good on Wednesday. We're really talking about some of the more subjective aspects of meeting these grant conditions as well. So when we pass this policy, there will need to be a checklist or a roster of grant review that is developed by staff in order to know that this evaluation is occurring. Does that make sense?
Mhm.
Any comments on recouping grant funds?
Holly,
Yes.
so are we talking about a presentation from the board on the, from staff on the process for periodic review?
I
So
would
that's
like,
something, yeah, I would like.
I would like to know what that process is, and sincerely, it's going to need if there is a written process now, it would need to change in response to this policy as it gets adopted. So it doesn't have to be today or tomorrow or next week, but it has to be sometime soon so that we know that there's a procedure that reflects the policy. Others?
That makes sense.
So is that going on to our parking lot?
Yeah,
The
parking lot
presentation on the
for
process
another,
for, yep.
yes.
I'm hopeful. Transfer of grant funded assets. Now, this is one of our obligations. So this is I'm looking at this grant funding assets. I'm looking for where the meat is, frankly. Obligated by law to ensure the assets constructed. There is a place elsewhere in this. I'm concerned that this is an incomplete statement here. I'm not quite sure what happened here. Anybody else feel confused by this entry?
Where exactly are you, Holly?
I'm at the bottom of page 5. There's an entry that proposes to be a policy transfer grant funded assets.
Just reading.
Yeah. Oh, I'm sorry. It continues on to page 6. That's why. That's a ton. And in looking at this page, I suddenly realized I skipped over an item that is pretty important and we'll need staff feedback on whether it's inherent in the construction standards that are already adopted. You see the reference above 3 regarding engineering, open architecture policy. Open architecture is required. This is public money, and it was the intent that the networks have an open architecture policy. This is undrafted and deserves maybe the same subcommittee that Dan's leading could pick this up. Does that seem right to you, Dan?
It could, I can certainly talk about it there.
Yeah.
It's probably more a statement of reserving capacity for external business leases, IRUs. I'm not sure, but more a statement.
Holly.
Yes, go ahead.
So can we just talk for a minute about the lien and an acknowledgement discussion that we had around that and concerns that we anticipate the CUDs will have?
Well, among the kinds of, yes, we can certainly talk about the liens. Do you remember what the point was that you wanted to ensure we discuss?
That the CUDs would be concerned about their ability to bond with these liens.
Yeah. So it's built right in here that, we recognize. So first of all, let's back up a minute. Federal funding is often contingent upon a lien placed upon the assets constructed with public money being subject to a lien. A lien is notice that somebody has an interest in an asset, and you can file those liens locally. For example, in a town clerk's office, you can file them at the Secretary of State's office. It's been a long time since I practiced law where liens were the subject of my practice. So and Tony has been contributing to this. I'm sure we will get some feedback about any nuance we need to know about. But the point is that there's requirements on these systems that if there is a transfer, we need to know about it. And it's also true that the public needs to know that we have an interest in the networks that we are supporting with public funding. So one might say, well, how am I supposed to get a bank loan or a bond when there's an encumbrance on my network? And the answer is that it's very common in the commercial construction world that you have the opportunity to go to the lien holder, and the lien holder is obligated to make a reasonable subordination of that lien to funding. So let's say you're getting a loan from I'm just going to use general terms here. You're getting a loan from a bank We would want you to get the loan from the bank so that it supports the construction. We would sign a document with the bank that subordinates this interest to the bank, to the bank's interest. And that is how it works. Okay. It ensures that we're doing our job also in being aware of the assets not being collateralized in the interest of being of using the value to build something else. Just saying, you know, in this day and age of people using, I'm thinking of the county sheriff debacles, but anyway, there it is. Any comments on this? And Dan, you have comments.
I have a short comment that that we can tweak this later, but just to enable the staff to do approvals, because a lease or an assignment or an IRU with the service provider in that territory, we wouldn't want that to conflict with what's intended here. So if AT&T needed to get to a cellular tower and the CUD was able to assign fibers to them through a lease, and we can tweak the language. I'm certain there's ways to tweak this language that the board does not have to approve that can be the function of the staff or the common business of the CUD without having to trigger this.
Yeah. And that's a situation where the asset's being used, but it's not collateralized. Yeah.
And
Okay.
Holly, I'm in support of the secondary lien approach to the bank. I want to make sure we get feedback from Vikuda and the CUDs on this item because it's imperative we don't hold up the lending capability. But as long as we can put a lien on and not deter their ability to get financing, I'm in support.
But I am assured that we will be getting feedback from the CUDs on this point.
So, you know,
And but before, just quickly, Brian has to drop off from between 9 and 10. And then also between 11 and 12. He'll be back on when his other meetings are closed up, just to give everyone a heads up.
okay. Okay, unless there are other comments here, I'm moving on. You know, it's always good to have a good conversation, but this is a commercial standard that I think will work without us holding title specifically. I mean, there's worse things that could happen here if we don't use this mechanism. Okay, so I'm on to page 7. Continuity of service. This requires some reporting from the CUDs. And this is an obligation on our part to make sure there's uninterrupted broadband service. And we're trying to work out here a way that's really about enforcement of availability. I think it's only appropriate that when we're looking at the standard of availability, we also have the opportunity to tap consumer complaints that are registered with the Department of Public Service. Any comments on this?
Yes.
This requires an annual submission by CUDs of a continuity plan. And it is specific to CUDs, and I think that's because of the way the statute is written, having to do with continuity in CUD operations.
Yes, and this is a big point of the state of Vermont's plan here, because we don't have the ability to hold providers accountable for internet service, broadband service, outside of these federally funded projects. And so as we have CUDs partnering with private providers, which was always the intended and hoped for objective, we want to make sure that, we have some providers who have we have a provider who's had not so great track record at the Department of Public Service. And so we want to make sure that we have terms in here. This is, different. How are we going to hold providers that have number of consumer complaints accountable? As someone who receives those from Vermonters and then directs them to the Department of Public Service, I can assure you that I receive them all the time still for providers that may or may not be engaged in work with our CUDs. So this is, I think, a really important aspect of our policy.
Patty, you have comments?
Sorry. Yes, I think this is great. And the only thing I would just note is that an annual submission sounds terrific. Staff would have to develop what that submission looks like. So some sort of structure around the reporting will be essential on this. So we don't get, yep, we did what we needed to do. We're good. I don't want a one pager. I want something more specific.
Right, that goes to the standards that are set, adopted here. It's also true
Exactly.
that, yeah, and it's also true that, in subsection B, staff needs to, and this really goes to Tony, there's some things Tony specifically is going to have to do here, but sign an agreement with the VCBB to allow VCBB to assure operation of the network assets. So this is going to have to happen kind of upfront, not annually, but upfront. And it's really to provide the vehicle for us to enact what the statute says or implement what the statute says. And that belongs in the parking lot, Tony, of things to do to implement this policy.
Holly,
Yes.
on this parking lot item, this feels like something that the CUDs, VCUDA, should take an active role in. We're thinking of, because they, there's going to be an obligation on them. We probably should talk with the department itself who does enforcement, because this is something we're actually creating. This is not something that exists or that can, that there are models for in terms of these public-private partnerships on
There are lots of models for operating agreements. So the world's not devoid of sample materials. But to quote Laura Sibilia, I'm sure we're going to have a lot of input and feedback on some of these things. And I think what you're saying is even in the parking lot process that's suggested by this agreement, we need to ensure that includes VCUDA or CUD feedback and department feedback. Have I got that
we
right?
have to have, yes, we have to have, we really have to have an understanding of how we're going to enforce this.
Yes, exactly.
How this is going to be enforced. And so these are agreements that our CUDs are making that we are supporting. And when, people are, going without internet or being told that they won't have internet for a week, that is not acceptable, but what are we going to do about it? And so that process, I think, needs a lot more work in partnership with our CUDs.
Christine. Christine?
You're on mute, Christine.
Thanks. I was just want to summarize what this parking lot item is. This is related to ongoing performance, customer performance. And you're basically what you're saying is we need an operating agreement that ensures that the performance of the customer is, meets the standards. Is that what I'm hearing?
It's just as it said in subsection B of continuity of service, an agreement with the VCBB. So it's actually the VCBB will be a signatory to this agreement. And once we have that standard agreement, this is something that staff will do on the VCBBs. You'd be signing those, Christine, but it's the vehicle for enforcing this.
Yeah, I just I'm kind of separating the parking lot from
Oh.
the process. Yeah, yeah,
Yes,
right.
yes,
Yeah.
yes.
Okay, great.
Yeah. Yeah, is that good enough? You got it?
Yep, got it.
Okay, great. Okay. Any other comments on continuity of service? Okay. Page 8. Authorized ownership transfers. This is related to some of the other things we've already been discussing. So, subsection 5 says, prohibit the sale or transfer of grant-funded network assets without the prior written approval of the board. That's a requirement. And we haven't really addressed this yet, to my knowledge. So this is trying to put some meat on those bones. So the assets we're funding have to be held in the name of the grantee. And when those assets, if those assets should be transferred, and transferred can include creating a licensee issue, I'm sorry, a license, if you wanted to partner and transfer ownership interest with your operator, that would need to come before the VCBB. The thing that is, I think, difficult to contemplate here is whether, the board's deliberation is really going to be about what's stated down here. It's in the discretion of the VCBB, whether it's likely to meet the terms of the grantee's business plan and promote sustainability of the grant-funded network. That's really the standard that we're looking at in terms of transference here. The other thing that's really tricky, and I think, Christine, this makes for another parking lot issue. The you might have 100-mile network, and it could be true that VCBB grant funding was only used for 40 miles of that network. So we need to be sure that our grant approvals are really clear on what is paid for with grant money, so that if you want to do an encumbrance or a transfer of that asset, you know that, for the other 60 miles, you might be free and clear, but for that 40 miles, you need the VCBB's approval. Laura, your hand's up. Any comment on this from board members? I'm only being specific that from board members because we know that there are people with ideas and other comments to have. Okay. Please note that the liens that are placed on the assets are good for 20 years. I think that this is a recommendation that comes from some grant experience that we have reviewed or observed. 20 years is beyond the depreciation schedule for tax purposes on these assets, but it's certainly true that we hope to get 20 years worth of use out of the fiber. So that's how we landed on that. Board members, is there any comment from you on 20 years? Okay.
Ollie, I think on that first one, I have notes here, but we can talk about it in more detail, but I don't believe this would exist, and I would hope it would never exist, but to consider that through crafty accounting, that no entity would say, I'm only going to use the grant funds to drop to the households. And my backbone, I didn't use any grant funds. Rendering the grant dollars, you only have access to the drops, and that the backbone of these networks, nobody could touch because private dollars were used for that. And I think that would be an unfortunate situation, and I don't expect that would occur, but we should have some consideration for that in this area. You tracking with me the way I described that?
I am
Yes.
absolutely tracking with you.
Great
And
point.
yeah, this happens. There's lots of examples of this kind of when you do sign-in authorities, and it says you can spend up to $5,000. So you never spend over $5,000. You just spend $1,000 multiple times, right? Same kind of a concept, right? So
Yeah.
I think this belongs in the parking lot. Like, I think there's a staff grant making item that ensures that a segment of network is designated as the recipient of the grant funding, not just a component part. It's not just the ponds on the network. Laura, did you have a comment?
Yes, and just to make a concrete reference for me, which is in 2009, there were a bunch of awards, federal public funds awards that were made that went to the building of fiber assets in the state, really critical fiber assets in the state that were then sold and are no longer publicly available. And so we don't want that to happen again.
Right.
Also, I will just note that I am hearing how excited the CUDs are to engage with us on these policies and how much experience and knowledge they have to share with us as we work through these.
I'm sure you are. And there'll be time for that.
Exactly.
So I'm moving on then. I do think maybe this segment has to be clarified to ensure that I can't analyze fast enough the language we ended up with here. Laura, your hand's still up. Do you need to make a comment? That it really has to specify in the grant what the segment of the network is that's encumbered by these obligations. And I want to be sure that that language shows up in this policy. Okay, number 6, allow an applicant to seek reconsideration of an adverse board decision. That's just good practice, right? So an adverse board decision in this instance could be an adverse staff decision. It could also be an adverse decision of the board, technically. We could review ourselves. But that's just a regulatory appeal, basically, straight up. I'm assuming no comment on that, so I'm moving on to page 7. Patty, am I driving you crazy at the pace at which we're doing this?
No, this is fantastic. You're doing a great job.
As subsection 7, ensure project completion within a reasonable period of time and consistent with applicable federal law and guidance. This is on page 9. The completion period statement here is that it be completed within 24 months of the date of the grant, unless the term of the grant is extended by decision of the VCC board for cause. And my intention here, based on the way the policy is written, is that things that aren't done, grants that aren't met in 24-month periods need to come before the board, not because staff couldn't say, oh, it's reasonable to extend it, but actually the board wants to know what the status of those grants are and what the hangups, the real life hangups are in getting that work done. I think it's important to put a little asterisk here and say, watch yourselves if you're taking out grant funds, that you're taking it out in 24-month chunks. Don't get ahead of yourselves, because if you aggregate too much funding, that funding could be rescinded if it's not completed in 24 months.
Great point.
And then number 8, comply with administrative bulletins. Number 5, who doesn't love administrative bulletin number 5? And 3.5. I have so little to say here, it's not even funny. Okay, I'm moving on. 8086 H1 requires CUDs borrow funds for purposes of financing to provide written notice to the VCBB. In the event that the CUD becomes aware that it's at risk of financial insolvency. This provision was added in the last legislative session. And I don't think the board discussed it in any detail. And I think we need to ensure that we implement it. And it is it's a little bit troubling because what it requires is that the CUDs are constantly monitoring their financial health to ensure that they are making that they're going to meet their obligations, which in turn means that their business plans are intact and proving true. So I'm just hopeful that this could be a parking lot item for implementation that really involves VCUDA, talking to VCUDA about what the reporting and financial standards are that are being promoted within the CUD organizations. So, you know, keeping any financial advisors to the CUDs aware that they have this trigger obligation if it looks like they're not going to meet their obligations. Does that make sense to everybody? And Laura, you wanted to speak?
Christine, correct me if I'm wrong. But I think there are auditing requirements on the CUDs, maybe not on the CUDs. I don't know if the money is still federal money when it goes from the VCBB to the CUDs. If that's not the case and the auditing is on the VCBB itself, I would. Can you just speak to
Yeah.
auditing?
Yes, the CUDs are required for an annual audit to comply with federal grant reporting rules. They have single audit requirements.
Yeah, okay, thanks.
Lucky them. But now they not only have the auditing requirement, but notice to the VCBB. And I would say that it's not just about the audit, Laura. It's about if you're in the course of the year, right?
I understand, but I mean, I think we should give ourselves a little relief that that obligation exists, at least in the short term.
Right.
And,
Right.
and you know, if not necessarily in the mid to long term.
So I'm moving on to any other commentary on this? I'm moving on to the bottom of page 9, sunset provisions. So there was this optimistic view that we should get our work done in time so that we could dissolve, and it is unclear to me anyway how the public interest was supposed to be monitored thereafter. And so Patty, I think Laura would join me in requesting that a subcommittee be formed to discuss the sunset provisions and what legislative initiatives or interagency activity needs to happen to address the sunset provisions. This is just a placeholder here.
Okay, agreed.
And I would add, this should probably include the department.
Okay.
Okay, so moving on to page 10. So here we begin the implied accountability for the VCBB to protect the public interest. And you know, one of the things we talked a lot about in our little work group was, you know, what constitutes the public interest going forward. And one of the things that all the required things are part of the public interest, but they're also these indices of public interest that are spoken to in the act. So the priority is given for universal service and geographic distribution of funds. This is something that staff has implemented, generally speaking, in the grant process. You know, we're very clear on this. But we need to state that that we're looking at 8086B in making grant decisions across the grant making program as a whole, not on a one-to-one comparative basis. It's implied in the language of the act that we're going to have 12 grants lined up, and we're going to pick the ones that give priority to universal service and geographic distribution of funds. But that's not how we roll. We get a grant, it addresses this piece of the state. We get a grant application, it addresses that piece of the state, and every one of them have to speak to the distribution of universal service. So this is in part to a policy to clarify that. So we keep looking at that as an overarching objective for universal service and to ensure geographic diversity of the community broadband fund. This is nothing short of just housekeeping here. Now, so it does speak, you know, we've recently completed a dashboard, and I'm not well versed enough in the dashboard, but at some point we have to have a piece that says we are covering our service universality score is X, or we are addressing universal service, and our geographic distribution is Y, so that we are really ensuring we meet this purpose. And I think our group tagged that would happen at the point of the annual report to the legislature. And this is really, I guess it's a parking lot issue in a way. We just have to make sure that we address specifically whether or not the grants we've made address or have reached the goal of universal service and geographic diversity, which kind of go hand in hand. Any comments from board members on that? Laura, and Tony, I'm reaching back to you because I don't remember where we decided to put in the priority for distribution to grid connected addresses. It's in here somewhere.
It's in there. Don't remember.
Is it in, pardon, Dan, I couldn't hear you.
I remember seeing it.
Yeah,
I do
it might
too.
be in the construction standards, and I just guess I'm alerting the board members and
Yeah,
the
I don't have a
fascinated,
quick hand.
yeah, the fascinated public, and I've made a note to myself to find it. We have made a policy decision to prioritize addresses on the grid. That does not satisfy the totality of the directions of the act, but it's definitely within our authority to determine that grid connected addresses are a priority in making the grants. And that policy has to be stated here. And so I'll make sure that it is. I'm going to move on. Says subsection 1, leverage existing private resources and assets with a high priority given to partnerships between CUDs and a distribution utility. And this isn't happening in the way that the act envisions. So I have suggested that we don't need a policy that is oriented towards prioritizing this objective. Any board members think that I'm missing something here?
No,
Okay.
it's, and your last comment is under section 881. It's implied accountability requirements to protect the public interest is where you, where the language is for prioritization on grid locations. It's in
Oh,
there.
oh, great. Thank you. I thought I was just having an out of body experience. Okay, all right. So everybody's okay with not having a policy that's prioritizing partnerships between CUDs and distribution utilities. Okay. Project readiness is at the bottom of page 10 and goes into page 11. This is really incorporated already by the viable business plan requirement and the demonstration of project readiness. And that's already part of the grant application process. So I think that that's just left to be sort of simple. I'm going to move on to subsection 3, provide broadband service that complies with net neutrality and consumer protection standards. A certification of each grantee annually that it meets the service conditions described in subsection 348B. And subsection 348B is currently a voluntary consumer standard certification, but we would like grant recipients to be obligated to make those certifications. And this is kind of the good housekeeping seal of approval for people who are operating publicly funded networks. So that's by reference of incorporating in the standards that are set for at 348B for all of the lifetime of those assets. I note that this
20
policy,
years.
yeah, 20 years. And I note that this policy of adopting 348B does not specifically address maintenance of the network or consumer response time. And so I'm raising that question to my fellow board members, whether like construction standards, those operating standards need some more detailed guidance or policy. I've seen head nods.
Yeah, I think we should create some sort of format that they have to test and prove that they're in compliance.
I hear a subcommittee for operating standards policy being created. Laura, are you hand up?
I think it's somewhat under number 4. When you're describing the continuity of your operation, policy describes 3 nines of availability.
Yep.
I look at this as more service quality. Just like the electric utilities have a service quality report that they have to respond to called SQUIRP, this could be a very similar effort. We have to take a call within 20 seconds. How many did you not take? You have to actually physically report down a bunch of standards every year how you did.
So
Outage
this might be a heavy lift if you're a CUD getting your staff started and operating your own network, but I think it could be a goal-oriented standard. And certainly for an existing operator, there should be a track record that we establish. You're smiling, Laura. Okay.
I'm concerned
Um,
about the separation between the carriers that are existing and the ones that are funded with, the difference between those and treatment of them differently, but let's see how the language plays out and
What do you mean?
maybe it all, um, it could be more work for the CUD to track this information that is not necessary to track, because there are no consumer complaints, and it's just added burden and cost is what it boils down to, perhaps, versus the incumbents that may not have to track to that level,
So-
causing them.
Go ahead,
Go
Laura.
ahead.
And so we have public-private partnerships, and so, yeah. I think if we're clear on what the objective is and we bring in our partners, to work through this, to make sure that we are meeting the objective, we can get there with a policy.
It's a special responsibility and a huge obligation to be the recipient of this public money. And it's problematic because the CUDs are doing the work that commercial entities didn't want to do.
Right.
And so we don't want to make that the bane of their existence. It's a hard enough job already. But in order to meet the statutory intent, we should at least have a way that we agree we're going to talk about it, or standards that we put out there for targets or something. And that's why there's no policy on this here. It needs the work of a subcommittee.
Yeah, it really does. And we need, yeah, it really does.
I agree with you on that. But I do disagree that the CUDs are doing the work that the incumbents didn't want to. I think they really wanted to, but it wasn't financially feasible for them to without proper funding. In other words, the business case wasn't there unless there was a whole bunch of grant money to build to these very remote areas.
And I apologize for that. Sounds like I'm casting aspersions. I'm not. They didn't want to because they couldn't afford to. Thank you.
Well, when we're talking about consumer protections, can't afford to, I don't think that passes, I don't think
The
that's
smell test.
acceptable, actually. If you're
I
providing
think it really depends on.
service,
I think
you have
it's
to
really
provide the service.
So Laura, I think we're only trying to make the distinction of, like, if you're saying you have to respond to calls within, I think Patty said 20, did you say 20 seconds?
Yes. If
Good
somebody
God.
calls,
Yeah, yeah. So
you have
that
to
might
pick
be
it
a
up.
heavy lift.
You have to
I-
pick up the phone within 20 seconds.
Wow. So that might be a heavy lift. So we're going to need to go through the criteria and see what's a reasonable indicator of not just consumer protection, but consumer service, and get to the point where we're feeling that we've at least put some standards out there that are meetable.
Yeah, and I mean, I feel like enforceable is also, a thing here. So,
Well, that's a part of the subcommittee conversation, because what are you going to do if it's not happening? That's a great question.
well, it's an important question, and it's, again, breaking new ground and something that I think we need the department and the CUDs to be a part of. And, I think
Right. The
there's an
simple
extremely high likelihood that we need to utilize this policy. So,
Right. And I
Right.
think you simply fit the punishment with the crime. If you didn't answer the phone by the standard, no more than 15% or whatever the number is, then you get a fine. And that motivates you to fix your system to at least have an automatic answering service or something of that nature. That's what the
I mean,
utilities do.
in theory, so the utilities are much more regulated than the utilities in Vermont are regulated, and
Exactly.
the broadband providers are not.
Understood.
And we have not put in place a full regulatory structure here. And so there is really some work to be done here. You know, those requirements were incumbent upon our telephone providers, and, you know, the failure to adhere to those is yet another reason why we are here today.
Okay, more work for the subcommittee. Okay. If it's okay, I'm gonna move on to subsection 4 on page 11, support low income or disadvantaged communities. It sounds to me like BEAD and DEI are going to be all over this. But in terms of grant funding, what we've chosen to do is to rely on universal service as the standard that ensures that we're serving low income or disadvantaged communities. And not avoiding them. So this is really a basic policy that suggests that if you feel that there is a grantee that is avoiding service to certain people or areas that seem to fit a profiling problem, you could appeal to the VCBB because this policy is in place. Okay. Okay. I'm going on to page 12, promote geographic diversity of fund allocations. This is here just because it's in the statute, but it's already addressed at 8086B. So I'm just noting that it's addressed. Subsection 6, provide consumers with affordable service options. Okay. This is a call to create an outreach and equity plan for the inclusion of low-income households. You know, I have some special experience in this area that I relied on, and one of the things that the BEAD report by the Vermont Group reported that's so important is that most people don't even know that there's subsidies available. And my personal experience in working with the CED community is that it reflects the billing practices and customer service practices, because they're supplied by operators, look a lot like the ISP, commercial ISP world. And so this is an obligation to be sure that we're being inclusive when we're a CUD. And those best commercial practices, I'm going to make just an offhand reference to, you know, some call centers set an obligation of, you know, handling each consumer call within, I'm going to make up a number, 8 minutes. Okay. That 8-minute call or standard may not serve the interests of low income households. Some environments don't make federal subsidies or other subsidies that are available to all consumers by giving them notice of them. They wait until the customer has defaulted, and then they make notice of a subsidy. So we're asking for an outreach and equity plan. And I think we're going to need to create standards for those plans. And so there's a parking lot item of what those plans should entail. But this is really about evolving best practices overall. And there's an annual report due. This annual report just keeps the board informed of how this element is doing, or how this deliverable is being implemented. Okay, any comments here?
Great stuff.
So on page 13, 7 is include public broadband assets that can be shared by municipal service providers that can support a variety of public purposes. This sounds a lot like a reference to open architecture in networks to me. So I note that we talked about that in terms of engineering. We've made a note here. Consider, however, whether in an operations policy that implements interoperability and shared infrastructure is advised. I mean, what I'm just going to say here is open architecture is going to be discussed in a subcommittee, and whether or not there is a recommendation for a policy that allows anyone who feels like they're not being able to get access on publicly funded networks could appeal to the VCBB. That's just like a random idea thrown out there, but it's really about how do you enforce the sharing of public assets. Okay, and for public purposes. I mean, I'm not just saying it's necessarily telecom providers that this could be the public assets here could be libraries, for example, or the support of public purposes could be some other public purpose, hospitals, libraries, whatever. And lastly, here's one that comes from the legislative findings and intent at the bottom of page 13. Policy and programs designed to accelerate community efforts that advance the state's goal of achieving universal access to reliability, high quality, affordable, fixed broadband. And this is where we talked about the prioritization of on-grid locations, because that's an acceleration mechanism. So in our policy, we are accelerating community broadband efforts by prioritizing on-grid locations. And I think we should set up this policy in this way so that if somebody wanted to prioritize something else that was an acceleration mechanism that maybe didn't meet the whole criteria of affordability, that the whole criteria of universal service, we could put these accelerants in a list under this policy. Is that making sense?
Mm-hmm. So anything that accelerates the deployment of high-speed internet can be considered.
Yeah, even though it might be a stopgap measure to meeting the whole objective.
Hmm.
And there you have it as, oh, no, it goes on. I'm sorry. I was hopeful. I'm sure you were too. Okay. Here's a policy under this section. VCBB board will not accept self-certification by the applicant or grantee to establish accountability for the public interest obligations of construction and operation assets paid for in whole or in part by the Community Broadband Fund. Further details will be developed in connection with the work relating to the sunset provisions. So that sunset committee needs to know, but this really speaks to grant self-certifications will no longer be evidence that criteria are met. You can't just say, tell us that you want to provide affordable broadband. Yes, I do. I want to provide affordable broadband. It's not enough. So this is the one place where we said, no, we want specific standards for each of these criteria. Moving on to 2, coordinate, facilitate, support, and accelerate the development and implementation of universal community broadband solutions. And this really goes to the evolution of the VCBB and the inclusion of BEAD funding as an expansion of our role and authority. And when I say ours here, I mean the board members. So we're acknowledging the Agency of Administration's determination of March 13th of 2023 that we are going to have jurisdiction over bead conditions and bead policy. And that our preference is to apply our existing policies, meaning the ones that evolved in this document over Act 71. We're going to prioritize those. And where we have a conflict, we'll consider that conflicting bead policy item. But it isn't the case that we're going to establish a whole set of policy decisions that are bead specific that may or may not be the same as our Act 71 policies. Some way to rein in the madness. Comments, questions? I
This
know
is
this is
fabulous. This is absolutely fabulous. Can't thank you enough for this heavy lift. To me, this really kicks into gear, putting things down in writing and then enacting staff to go back and do all the hard work of the details. But this is fabulous and fantastic. Thank you, everybody involved.
Thank you.
Tony, Laura, Holly, tremendous.
well, and thanks to all you board members. I know it's the most fun you've ever had in a board meeting. but
It's necessary. We have to stop using the phrase, we are flying on a ship as we're building it, or the airplane as we're building it. This is stopping and we're building it. I can't thank you enough for this hard work.
pleasure.
Laura?
Had a good team.
Patty,
Yes.
can we just have a moment here to be clear about how we will receive input and how we will incorporate it in the timeline for that, just so that we're all clear on this?
Yes. So there's no action being taken today on this memo. This is laying the landscape for feedback. Eventually, we will put all the words into policies and have a policy, probably a policy handbook or something of that nature. But I would like to hear from the VCUDA, from the CUDs, not today, the next meeting.
Are we going to
Get
use
feedback.
Are we going to
It's-
use the special meeting on the 28th for that purpose?
And here's just, to add a further dimension, one of the requests that we had made, Holly and I had made to the board, was to consider pausing grants until we had adopted this work. And so I would stand by that as long as we act with intention and quickly.
I hear that as a
incorporating our
motion.
partners.
I hear that as a motion, Laura, and I would like to second it.
Okay.
All right,
Well, I
there's a
don't want to,
motion.
I don't,
There's
I
a motion
don't
on
want
the
to jam this
floor.
down. Yep, okay, okay.
There's a motion on the floor. There's a second discussion. So the
So
motion is to pause any any grant issuance as of today until we receive feedback
And make
So
on the
policy.
policy.
okay, so I am not willing to make that motion unless we obligate ourselves to a timetable. And so I am willing to make that motion, provided that we obligate ourselves to a timetable and provide opportunity for feedback. And I think that timetable needs to acknowledge that the entities, the Vermonters that are doing this work that we are supporting, are in motion. And so I think we have to come to the table quickly here. And so I would like us to meet on the 28th with the intent of approving these policies. I would like us to make sure that we are setting up a process. I see Rob has his hand up, that allows for feedback in a way that allows us to contemplate it in advance of that meeting and come to that meeting ready to discuss and approve, and for those things that we won't be ready to approve, a process for moving forward with grants.
So we have received some commentary from staff, right, Tony?
Yes, yes, that has been sent on to you and Laura, correct?
Yes, and so we can, we can review that as staff input. And we have to recognize that we have some items that have been put to a subcommittee, so we're going to exclude those from the timetable. Right, Laura? Like, that work isn't going to be done by the 28th.
Well, I'd like us to just be specific. Because this is a big, actually, to pause granting until we pause, we need to be extremely specific. And I'd like us to hear from the CUDs before we complete that motion.
Rather than hear from every CUD, I'd like to limit that to Rob Vetsky from Vikuda. And before we go to Rob, there was a suggestion put forward by Krista Shute that I think is one to consider, is that we actually act on the NEK and the Maple grant today, with a caveat that the issuance of the grants today, if approved, would be subject to any policies that we come up with in the next, whatever period, in the next months or weeks. So it's a caveat, it's a workaround to move on these grants and not hold them up. And they understand that they're going to have to reply to something that they don't know yet. Laura, what is your reaction to that?
I'm actually okay with that. I want to make sure that Brian's caught up to where we are also, because this is a fairly important motion that we have on the floor here. Have you heard the motion, Brian?
I didn't hear the motion, but I get the context. So I think it's about the NEK and Maple.
No, it's about
Extensions, right?
pausing granting. It's about pausing granting until we approve policies. And I'm actually not willing to, so right now I'm the mover and Holly's the seconder. I'm actually not willing to make that motion without a firm commitment from the board on a timetable and specificity about what that means.
Are we in a position to have a firm commitment on time frame?
So what we're talking about now is what are the specific pieces that we want to come back at the next meeting if we are to meet on the 28th? Is it the 28th? And then what are the pieces that would be that are going to subcommittees that would not hold grants up, I think is the point in the conversation that we're at.
Okay.
So can we start, Patty, I know Rob Vitsky is waiting to make comments. Can we ask first whether we have a full attendance by board members at the meeting on July 28th?
I'll be there.
I'm a yes, you're a yes.
And the time is 8 a.m. to noon?
I have this hard stop at 11.
Let's call that 8
I
to
can-
11 then.
And Brian, you're fine with that?
In the 8 to 11 looks like I can make that work. Yes.
All right. I have a conflict that popped up, but I'm going to have to change that conflict. So I will commit to being there on the 28th.
So our goal on the 28th would be to hear comments on all provisions that were proposed that were not assigned to subcommittees. And pass and make a decision on, go through and pass each policy as we can. But I'm saying that, and I'm sitting here going, isn't it the case that we want grants to be subject to VCBB policy, period, end stop? Always.
Yes, and we can come up with policies as however we want and dream on into the future.
So maybe the answer is we want to do both things. We want Ellie DeViers and De Villiers and Krista Shute wrote in asking that we consider their grant applications subject to VCBB enacted policies of the
I-
future.
I support that. I don't
I
want to
think I
hold them
do
up.
too.
I
I
don't wanna
think I
hold 'em
do
up.
too. And if they're willing to take that risk, I guess,
too.
you know, I would be a little concerned, but I think that's within reason. But I also think we should meet on the 28th and get this done while it's
Agreed.
somewhat fresh.
Yes.
Agreed. So we have a motion on the floor in a second to rescind any action on grants. You either have to take that off the floor or we vote on it and vote it down.
Should we hear Rob Vitsky first?
Sure. Rob?
I'm going to make no one happy because my chat window is lighting up here with all kinds of comments. But let me just first say thank you, Holly, Laura, and all of you. This is tremendous progress from the conversation we had a couple months ago. And I think as the CUD's had a chance, frankly, we've been really focused on the BEAD comments and the RFI. When this came in a week ago Friday, that's probably the one time you'll hear someone say that we were happy for the delay that last week's weather caused, and we have more comments to put together. But this is great progress. This needs to happen, and we want to be full partners in continuing to create an ecosystem of controls and processes that protect the public interest. And so, you know, we're all in. I think the comments you just made about allowing the 2 grants that are pending to go forward are really important and probably reduce the concern. I would just say this, that practically, if we were to send you comments today, which we're not ready to do, but let's say by early next week, and then Laura and Holly and Tony were have a chance to do revisions and publish them in the board book before the 28th so that we could have an informed discussion, it's really tight. And, you know, one of the things I think that's a feature of the way things have been done is that smart people have gotten around the table and really worked hard together on these kinds of issues. Act 71 is a result of that. We're going to have the same challenge, frankly, with the volumes of new policy embedded in the BEAD, Volume 1 and Volume 2 that need to get submitted, and squaring them back to these policies. So I would just urge, you know, if there's simple things that can be approved, let's do that. I agree with that. But if there are things that take time, let's allow them to take time and get them right. And I think, you know, in the public letter that the auditor sent last month, kind of marking the progress that had happened in the prior board meeting, they acknowledged that, you know, we're trying to be thoughtful here. And I would just encourage us to continue to do that, take the time it takes to get these right. Let Tony have the time to get the language right in each sentence, and for the input to come in for whatever level of iteration it needs. And I think, again, the CDs are committed to this. You saw them say they're willing to take the risk on what you eventually pass. So let's take the time to get it right.
I have a question for Rob. Is it possible for you to not get necessarily detailed feedback, but to identify which of these statements are the ones that you want to focus your comments on? Because there may be ones that we could deal with and pass without a lot of lift. You know, maybe
Well, we certainly
so,
can take on that. We didn't look at it from that lens, Holly, but I know just looking at the document I have, there's some that don't have much markup on them. So absolutely, we could do that. There are others where, like so many things, the conversation about intent and whatever as a group is that as important as the actual words we choose, where we really do want to engage with the subcommittee on conversation. But I love the idea of taking the ones we could take off the plate and getting them done. That's great.
when could you provide that list?
Today's Tuesday, end of the week.
So Patty, that would mean that the agenda for the 28th is determined by I'm going to take a moment and say this about all that. This is a very collaborative little democracy we run here. And sometimes we have to acknowledge where the board is obligated to make certain decisions and where the board has room to, look at what's facilitating. The little working group spent quite a lot of time trying to make these palatable policies to some degree. So, I mean, I'd be inclined to try to pass the obligated policies and prioritize those. Unless there are some of those that, I mean, yeah, I'm all for conversation, but is it conversation that has a fix, or is it conversation that grows understanding? There's a distinction.
In some cases, we believe we can improve the policies and better protect the public interest. In some cases, there are minor tweaks for workability. You talked a lot about liens and protecting the public interest. The folks that have gone through the bonding process have some specific concerns and ideas about that. So I think it depends on each question, Holly. And again, I love the idea of trying to cut free as many as we can and say we endorse these. But we haven't sorted it that way, so I actually don't know how big the problem is.
Okay, Patty, I leave the agenda control in your hands, knowing that there may be a way to pass some, but not all.
I certainly would like to get feedback from the CUDs and VCUDA, even on the obligated. I don't want to pass something and then we have to immediately change it. So I would like to take the time and get your feedback, Rob.
Patty.
Yes, Laura.
So I am okay today moving forward with these two existing CUD projects that are in motion that we've made previous construction grants to, with the caveat, as Holly has said, and then having this meeting to move. I would suggest at the July meeting that we are approving what we can approve and also getting very specific about the assignments of the other items. And so I hope my fellow board members would be willing to entertain having some CUD members be part of those working groups. These are board policies, so they're just providing inputs on these, but I think we should draw from the knowledge where it exists, and also potentially including the department where they are able and willing to participate and share their experiences as well. So my suggestion, to be clear, is that we vote down this this motion and
just withdraw it.
Okay, I'm happy to withdraw it. And that we proceed with these two grant applications, hearing them and making decisions on them with that caveat. And then our meeting on the 28th will be to, hopefully we will have feedback from whoever wants to provide it. Board members, DPS, staff members, CUDs. We have a discussion and get as far as we can in terms of approving, and also set up those subcommittees on the 28th. That's my suggestion.
Okay, very excellent suggestions. I'm in complete support of including CUDs and subcommittees if we can get folks to help. I know they're busy, but if we can get them in on the ground level to create these, would be fabulous. And anybody else that would make sense, Department of Public Service, others, legislative committee members. I think that's great. I would like hold on, Holly. I want to go very formal on this motion that was on the table and seconded. For the minutes, Laura, can you state that you, as the motion issuer, is withdrawing your motion?
I do withdraw my motion.
Okay, the motion that was on the table and seconded has been withdrawn. Holly, as the seconder of that motion, can you chime in here?
I concur.
You support withdraw? Okay, the seconder,
Yes.
Holly, has supported withdrawal. The motion is no longer on the table, and we're going to let the minutes reflect that, please. So there's no further action required. We're going to take the necessary steps going through the board packet and going through NEK and Maple's grant review as we get there. We are gonna meet on July 28th from starting at 8 o'clock, with an end date of 11 o'clock.
Could we,
And we
could
will-
we ask that submissions or comments to be considered on the 28th arrive to Tony by the at least the 26th? Because what we need to do, and it's my thought, Tony, what we need to do is take the table and use it as guidance for just registering where there are comments, like, if we are going to invite participation, there might be some things to pass that have very little participation. I don't know how, are you suggesting, Laura, that we just consider any comments we get real time in the meeting on the 28th?
No, I would, well, I mean, we're asking for comments, so and I would, no, I'm asking for comments to be sent in advance. And I think the
By when?
26th is too late, actually, Holly.
Okay,
I
okay.
would say the 21st and the 24th to try and be reasonable, so.
Let's
Okay,
give the weekend for folks. Let's do the 24th.
okay.
That's almost
And
a full week.
And Rob, and if we can ask the CUDs actually, if possible, to just give some thought about, several CUD folks that may be willing to partner on these. So we're not looking for, 20 people. We're looking for, these are small working groups. So if you can come to that meeting or in advance of that meeting, here's a list of folks that are willing to work on
Excellent.
some of these subcommittee policies. Patty, if Christine could reach out to the department and see if the department has any interest in providing any of their experience or knowledge on any of those, if the board is willing to hear that, I think that would be helpful.
Excellent. Great suggestions, Laura. All right. Anybody else? All right.
So it's the
fabulous.
21st or the 24th, Patty?
24th is the deadline to receive comments.
And who are they going to?
Tony.
And going to Tony, but Christine, you're gonna summarize. We will get all the comments as board members on the end of the day, the 24th.
Yeah, I think so.
Yeah, actually, that's a good deadline because Tony goes on vacation the 25th, so.
Oh,
right.
gosh.
She goes
Oh,
on vacation
gosh.
25th, 28th. I mean,
God forbid.
All right, I want to make the comment deadline by noon on the 24th. I don't
That'd be
want
great.
people sending it in at 4 o'clock and Tony's packed up to go away for vacation. So noon on the
Thank you.
24th is the deadline.
Thank you.
And Tony, package them up and send them in their raw form. Don't spend a lot of time to make them pretty.
Okay, got it. Thank you.
You're welcome. So deadline noon on the 24th, folks. All right. That is the conclusion of accountability, of our accountability item, unless anybody has any more things to add. All right, seeing none. All right, next on the agenda is the BEAD initial proposal.
Yes, I'll turn this over to Lisa to take Lucy to take the lead on this.
Good morning, everybody. So I was going to give us brief kind of overview of where we're at with BEAD, and Brees is here, our project manager from Vernonburg Group. So in a minute, we'll have Brees share her slides. I'll talk through a little bit of an overview and then turn it over to Vernonburg Group to go over a few of the specifics of the plan and then receive feedback from board members. But Brees, why don't you go ahead and share your slide, and I'll kind of start by just orienting everybody to where we are in this process and what we're reviewing today. I just need to be made a presenter, I think.
Hey, Rob, as Rob Fish, I assume you can do that.
Thank you, Rob. You? Okay. You can go ahead, Bruce. So for this meeting, we're going to kind of quickly overview Vermont's Internet for All plans as a whole, and then summarize the 5-year action plan and the initial proposal, volume 1, which is what we have the rough draft of, leave room for discussion, and then talk about next steps. And I will say, with both the 5-year action plan and initial proposal, volume 1, this is kind of the rough draft of the rough draft. We wanted to get a chance to get feedback from board members first thing early on. So this is what we sent to you as a rough draft that has not yet even been posted for public comment. We will then post for public comment, and there will be kind of further opportunity to continue to refine these drafts. Go ahead, Brees. So as far as kind of a reminder of where we are in the BEAD process, the BEAD 5-year action plan, the public comment period is July 19th through August 2nd. There actually is not a required public comment period at all from the federal government, but we wanted to make time for a public comment period. And then August 28th is our deadline from the NTIA for submitting the BEAD 5-year action plan to the federal government. The initial proposal has been broken down into 2 volumes by the NTIA. And the next slide, I'll go over what's in volume 1 and volume 2, but I think the important point to make right now is that volume 1 is what we are considering today, and volume 2 is where all of the decisions are made about the process for how BEAD subgrantees are selected, prioritized, and how that competitive process is run. So just to clarify, oh, you can go back 1 slide, Brees. Just to clarify that that's not yet what we'll be talking about today. But we will be talking about volume 1, and I'll go into that in a minute. Once both volume 1 and volume 2 have been submitted to the NTIA, there's a process of seeking approval from the NTIA, and after the initial proposal, the kind of work that gets done on the Vermont side is running the challenge process to the FCC's maps. So we run our state challenge process to update the availability in the FCC maps, which are the maps we have to use for BEAD, and then also running subgrantee selection on the state side, and all of that happens before the final proposal is submitted to the NTIA next year. So when we submit the final proposal, we are submitting it with the proposal of who the subgrantees will be, how much will go to each subgrantee, and all of that process has already been run. Okay, go ahead, Brees. Okay, so 5-year action plan is very high level. It's vision, goals, and objectives, current state, challenges, and summary of stakeholder engagement and implementation plan. But this is considered more high level and more focused on vision and goals, whereas the initial proposal is what gets into kind of actual commitments of what Vermont and BCBB intend to do with the money. Volume 1, what we're discussing today, is initial identification of unserved and underserved locations, definition of community anchor institutions, and then the challenge process to the FCC data on our state side, which, just to clarify, is different than the challenges that we've been submitting to the FCC over the past year. This is the brand new process to modify data for Vermont's use for BEAD plans, and this includes kind of two steps. First, a modification stage that VCBB conducts, and then second, a challenge process that's open to nonprofits, internet service providers, and municipalities. BEAD Initial Proposal Volume 2, which is not what we're discussing today, that's kind of the next step of our timeline, is where, as mentioned earlier, the actual subgrantee selection process is determined, and a few other kind of more detailed policy decisions. And the one other point I want to make is that the digital equity 5-year action plan is not on this slide, but is also forthcoming. And we were granted, Alyssa, were we granted, or we have applied for an extension on the deadline of that plan, which will extend it out until March as the deadline. We might still submit sooner than that. I
Yes,
believe we've applied. Yeah,
we've applied and it's been approved by NTIA, but there's still some other federal cross checks that are being looked at.
Thanks. Okay, go ahead, Brees. I think
Can we back up?
Holly
Can we
has a
back up
question.
one? I have a question for you. So I'm trying to look through, I'm not sure I'm reading your slide right. There's the BEAD 5-year action plan, vision, goals, and objectives, for example, current state of broadband digital inclusion. I don't see that, like those bullet points that are in the action plan, I don't see them replicated in volume 1 or volume 2. Are they part of volume 1, the first column?
The BEAD 5-year action plan is a different deliverable than volume 1. So there are certain sections of the 5-year action plan that end up being essentially copied and pasted into initial proposal volume 1 and volume 2, but there's other sections that are not included in volume 1 or volume 2.
So somebody just help me with the orientation here. Am I supposed to have read and know the 5-year action plan, and has it been approved by the board?
So both the 5-year action plan and initial proposal volume 1, both of those are included in your packet today, and both of those are rough drafts that we're seeking feedback today from the board.
Okay, so I'm just conflating and confusing. Okay, thank you very much for.
So 5-year action plan and initial proposal volume 1 are currently in kind of pre-rough draft stage, meaning that we're discussing them with you, and then we'll formally publish a rough draft. Actually, tomorrow, unfortunately, the timeline got more crunched due to the delayed board meeting. Initial proposal volume 2 is in brainstorm stage. There's no draft yet on that.
So the comments you take today are last chance at the draft that becomes public, but it's still in draft.
Correct. And depending through our discussion, we can kind of discuss, like, we will welcome comments from the board throughout the public comment period as well. So, just if there's comments that need to be incorporated prior to posting publicly versus comments that we'll continue kind of working on as we solicit public comment, we can also kind of consider that throughout this discussion today.
Thanks for the guidance for remedial learners. Thank you.
Absolutely. Go ahead, Brees. Okay, so then just a couple context notes. I think I've covered this already. The pre-rough draft stage that we're in right now, some of the mapping is going to need to be updated prior to the final draft being submitted, as well as we're continuing our outreach and engagement. So we'll make sure before we submit the final draft, we're going to have updated numbers on that. Like I said, subgrantee selection process is not dealt with in either of these documents because that's dealt with in the upcoming initial proposal volume 2. And then the digital equity plan also upcoming is where there's going to be more detail on affordability and accessibility barriers. So that's all I had for just a quick kind of reorienting all of us as we switch gears to this topic. And I'm going to turn it over to Brees, who will go through a few of the high-level pieces of the plans, and then we'll open it up for discussion.
Thank you very much, Lucy. Hello, everyone. I'm Breeze McIlvaine from the Vernon Group, helping you all with developing these plans. So we'll start with walking you through a summary of the BEAD 5-year action plan, and then we'll walk you through a summary of the draft initial proposal, Volume 1. As Lucy did a great job level setting, these are our drafts. They're going to go out for public comment, so there's still time to provide and incorporate feedback, and we look forward to your thoughts. So the BEAD 5-year action plan is Vermont's strategy for achieving universal broadband service, as well as starting to tackle broader adoption and digital equity priorities. And it effectively has two audiences. One is Vermonters and Vermont stakeholders, all of you, being Vermont's broadband strategy. And then it also, as Lucy explained, is a specific deliverable to NTIA as part of the process for releasing Vermont's BEAD funds for that grant program. And beginning with the 5-year action plan is Vermont's vision, which is every Vermonter in an unserved or underserved area gains access to broadband at speeds of at least 100 by 100 megabits per second, and that Vermonters understand the value internet connectivity can offer and have the devices and skills they need to meaningfully take advantage of it. Vermont is working towards this vision through coordinating, facilitating, supporting, and accelerating community broadband solutions. We've outlined in the 5-year action plan 5 goals for this effort. The first is mobilize resources for end-to-end fiber broadband infrastructure deployments to all unserved and underserved locations and community anchor institutions. Then also ensuring sustainable community-driven solutions across the entire state. We also want to ensure high-speed broadband services and devices are affordable and advanced digital equity for all Vermonters, and enhance workforce development for broadband and the digital economy, and also improve socioeconomic conditions across Vermont. As part of the plan, we include information about the current state in Vermont for broadband access, broadband deployment, adoption, affordability, and broader digital equity. And so in the plan, you'll see some description of needs and gaps, as well as assets in the state of Vermont around these areas. And just to call out a few that are familiar to you, I'm sure, about 20% of households in Vermont lack access to 100 by 20 megabits per second broadband connectivity. And there also are only 17% of eligible Vermont households that are eligible for ACP, the Affordable Connectivity Program. Only 17% have enrolled so far. And 23,000 approximately Vermont households have access to the internet but can't afford it right now. But in some better news, we did a survey, as you all know, of the public as part of this process, and the response showed that access to devices and confidence in digital skills weren't significant barriers for many Vermonters. So that's a great sign. A lot of demand for broadband access, and this program will be able to address that challenge. So we're very excited about that, the potential for success here.
Brees, can I ask you a quick question on that last slide?
Of course.
When we say 17% of eligible Vermont, this is under affordability, have enrolled in the ACP, does that include people who have chosen to use ACP for their mobile phone service, or is that only broadband? Fix
That's a
would
great
include both.
question.
That would
Yeah,
include both.
That includes both, everything?
Yes, yes.
Thank you.
yeah. So while that program is still available, this is a great opportunity to promote it so that more people can benefit from it. For each of the goals, we've outlined some indicators of success. In designing these, we wanted them to be specific, achievable, relevant, and timely, but also aggressive and ambitious. So as part of the first goal of mobilizing resources for end-to-end fiber, we want to have 100% of currently unserved and underserved on-grid locations to have access to 100 by 100 by the end of 2028. And then similarly for those off-grid locations, at least 100 by 20. We also have a goal of 100% of BEAD subgrantees with documented and meaningful community support for partnerships. So this is an example of this would be a formal partnership and support with a CUD. And we have some targets around workforce development, as well as broader affordability and digital equity initiatives. As I mentioned, an example here, as I mentioned, is there's high device ownership in Vermont. So we set a goal of 95% of households have a laptop or tablet or personal computer. So that's a lot. So we're hoping these goals are both achievable and ambitious to make the most of this opportunity. And then we also have some broader links to socioeconomic conditions. These don't have specific targets. We did that intentionally because it's very hard to prove the causation of broadband access to some of these impacts. However, we do believe that there is correlation, and I think it's important to be intentional about tracking and measuring this. So we summarize in the plan existing funding that Vermont has to pursue universal service. And the top line here is that there is approximately 394 million in existing funding available for extending high-speed broadband infrastructure to unserved and underserved locations and community anchor institutions. And you'll see a lot more detail in the plan around this.
And I'll say, just to clarify, that includes the 229 million of BEAD funding.
But it doesn't, but also clarification, it doesn't account for what we've already allotted. So that might create some confusion. So far, we've allotted about 130 million. So if you look at the total commitment that Vermont has made, we're up around 544 million.
Wait a minute.
Yeah.
I just got lost.
Yeah, explain that, because I was confused by this number as well. This for BEAD funding. Can you explain this? Maybe it'll do a better job, Brees, because we've already allotted 130 million. How is that considered?
What is the difference between a lot and committed expended?
We've already committed 130 million. Same thing, same word.
Yeah.
So I don't understand where we've committed or expended 7.5 million in affordability programs. Can someone talk to me?
Yeah, sure. That's basically the amount of money that's been spent on the affordable connectivity program so far in the state.
Oh,
that's the
over
subsidy.
time for service?
For the affordable connectivity program, subsidies that individual discounts for eligible low-income households.
And are you saying that
dollars.
the ACP allocation of 41.7 million is how many households would qualify for ACP?
What we do is we look at how much. What we did is we looked at how much money is actually left in the program. So realistically, how much money could be spent looking forward until that program runs out of funding. So the 41 million is basically the total of what's already been spent and what could be spent, you know, in the next year or so until that money runs out.
The question.
This is confusing. And because, you know, ACP is a time-based thing. So when you say committed or expended, today we have 17% of the eligible population who is spending or is claiming ACP benefits, whether they're on cell phones or broadband or whatever. I think what you're saying is this is a point in time snapshot.
Yes, absolutely. Yep. And so that's the money looking backwards. It's the money that's already been spent on ACP subsidies in the state of Vermont.
Then the money that's already been spent on our Act 71 ARPA distributions is in here someplace.
Yeah,
Yes.
there's a lot more detail in the plan itself. This is just a summary table. So
So which
there's a line
category-
item basically for
but-
each.
But which category does it fall in? Is it part of the first category?
Yeah. For ARPA,
Yeah.
ARPA would be in the first row.
Yeah, okay.
And the committed, notice there's a column that says committed expended. That's what has been done so far. So I think that's,
Okay.
keeps it clear.
So I was confused. I still am confused on the committed expended because Christine, I think you were saying something about 130 million, and what I see is 165, 7.5 and 2.7. That's one question that I have. And the second question that I have on the affordability programs and the ACP commitments expended. Do we have that information on the specific companies that have received those funds or that those commitments are made to?
NTIA does.
Yeah, I don't know. So it'd be USAC has that information. We can check to see whether they publish it by operator. I know we have it by state, tracked on a
Okay.
weekly basis by them.
Yeah, I think
And
Lucy can
Laura,
add. Yeah, go ahead, Lucy.
to answer your first question, so when Christine was saying the 130, I believe that was in reference specifically to ARPA money, whereas Act 71 ARPA money, when you go into the draft 5-year action plan and the initial proposal, it's actually in both places. There's a longer table that kind of outlines all of the different sources that we're drawing from in this funding inventory. And so the 165 includes additional sources of deployment money, and it, in addition to Act 71 ARPA. And the other point I want to make is that we're kind of following guidance. The federal government is fairly prescriptive in how we do this funding accounting and what we do and don't include. So we're following guidance we have to follow as to what is in and out. That might be so for example, everything federal or state, is included. So RDOF money is included in here, which is part of the guidance we're following. RDOF money is not something that the state of Vermont or that Vermont state government touches in any way, but because this is accounting that we're doing for the federal government following their kind of, they want a standard accounting from every state in a way that they can compare state to state. So I just wanted to make that point that it's a point in time, as of now, it's a point in time. It includes state and federal funding sources. On the flip side, it does not include private sources that we all consider, relevant, such as a CUD partnering with a private ISP, and the private ISP is putting some of their own money in. That's an example of something that's not included. So just to add that context.
And
Okay.
I know this is the gift that keeps on giving, but in public connectivity, is that like BTOP related funding that, like, why is public connectivity different from deployments? Like, do you understand what that category means?
One example of public connectivity is money that was invested into public Wi-Fi hotspots during COVID. And so that would be an example of deployment and non-deployment is more kind of infrastructure build out. Wi-Fi hotspots isn't something we want to count against the money, the total money required to bring fiber to every home in Vermont, but it does fall under the umbrella of state and federal money invested in broadband that the NTIA is asking us to account for.
And I know this is minutia, but do you know where BTOP funding from years past falls in this kind of accounting?
It's not in here.
It's not in here.
Okay, good.
Yeah.
So just
Yeah.
to follow up on my, on the ACP, I'd like a definitive answer. Could we get from staff a breakdown of where those funds have gone to? So from the can staff get from the NTIA? I'm sure that that's public information. Those are public dollars going to companies. Can we get a breakdown? And I've seen a master list of where those have gone to. I'd just like to know who is receiving those subsidies in the state of Vermont.
If I would be happy to work with Vernonburg, and if that information is available, we can pass it along to board members.
Yep.
Great. And if it's not,
Paul,
by
can you and I maybe
company
connect on
company
that?
name,
We'll take that as a
company
sign.
name.
Yeah, Laura's asking for breakdown by company.
And amount for over a course of, like 2022, 2023. And if
Yeah,
you get to
commitments
the point
and
of
expenses.
yeah, and
Yep.
Yeah, I think
Yep.
that would be helpful information. If we're able to get it, we will pass it along. And
Cool.
Paul and Brees, we can connect on that
Yes.
after.
Yeah, definitely.
Thanks.
We'll do it.
As you all have heard a lot about before, we designed and conducted an intense stakeholder engagement process with the intention of reaching a lot of diverse communities and stakeholders. And this is an ongoing process. So here and in the plan is a summary of the events and meetings and surveys and RFI requests for input responses. And we'll keep updating this, of course, because we're still doing public comment, and then engagement will continue for the digital equity plan as well. And this is as of July 10th, so already the survey responses are still increasing along with some of these other factors. We're getting some great engagement there. In the plan, there's also a section describing some issues to overcome for successful implementation. These are all addressable or reconcilable in VCBB's view, and we just summarized them into 3 categories: institutional, legal, and economic. For institutional, some of these are serving historically marginalized and difficult to reach populations and ensuring CUDs have the capacity to deploy networks and can provide affordable service in a commercially sustainable way. Some of the legal considerations are balancing compliance with federal statutory requirements to conduct an open and competitive subgrantee selection process, and doing that while staying true to the municipal CUD structure and the community-driven vision of Act 71. And then some economic challenges or supply chain challenges that everyone is facing, some anticipated labor shortages that the VCBB has already been working on, and tracking and maximizing all available sources of broadband funding to make sure that we can be as strategic as possible with the resources that are available. And the navigating the technology solutions and the resulting cost to be successful with Vermont's geography and terrain, as well as population density.
Yeah, Laura has her hand up.
Oh, sorry. Thank you.
Apologies.
No question
Lowering.
yet? Okay, great. Thank you. This is an estimated timeline. We'll be submitting the final BEAD 5-year action plan at the end of August. Not too long after will be initial proposal volume 1. And then volume 1 in September, volume 2 in early November. And once volume 2 is approved, sorry, volume 1 is approved and volume 2 is submitted, Vermont can start its challenge process, which begins the process for getting towards actually conducting the subgrantee selection process. And then we expect that VCBB in Vermont will be able to access and start allocating the BEAD funds probably Q4 next year. And then the goal is being successful by the end of 2028. And Lucy talked a bit about the timeline as well. Thank you, Lucy. And in the draft plan, we also described our estimated cost for extending fiber to Vermont's 49,773 unserved and underserved locations. We're estimating a range between 500 to 700 million for achieving this. And that we think this will be addressable. We'll have enough funding to do this with BEAD, with ARPA, with the subgrantee matches, as well as other funding sources. So we're very optimistic that there will be enough to achieve this goal. And of course, there are a lot of variables into that estimate. You'll say that's a pretty big range. So some of those variables include the cost of extending end-to-end fiber connectivity to each location in the state, in a variety of terrains and other factors. The amount of matching funds, we don't know that yet, as well as amount of funds that perhaps other funds Vermont will be able to set aside to cover any cost for under BEAD or other resources, and how that will be handled. But we think this will cost about 500 to 700 million, and we believe that there will be enough to get the job done. So that's the summary of BEAD, of the BEAD 5-year action plan, and now I'll summarize the initial proposal of volume 1. What's in volume 1, as Lucy explained, this includes the initial identification of unserved and underserved locations that will be eligible for BEAD funds, as well as the definition and identification of community anchor institutions. It describes the proposed challenge process and the pre-challenge process location modifications and deduplication that the state will go through. This is an illustrative map to show where we're seeing the density of the eligible unserved and underserved locations, and this will be updated before it's finalized. VCBB, through a lot of stakeholder input, has modified slightly the NTIA's list of community anchor institutions for states to consider. So this includes schools, higher education institutions, workforce development organizations, various others that are probably unsurprising. And then VCBB added houses of worship, correctional facilities, public outdoor spaces, as well as public access television station facilities. So those are the changes that VCBB made. So then this is the challenge process, beginning with identifying the locations and sharing those locations publicly, and then organizations can submit a challenge on the classification of served, unserved, underserved, and then any ISP that is in that jurisdiction of that challenge location has an opportunity to issue a rebuttal, and then the VCBB will make a final determination, and then that goes to NTIA for the final approval. And that's the quick summary. So thank you very much, Paul, others, VCBB team. Is there anything that I missed you'd like to highlight?
No, excellent work. I've been, I'll just say I've been really happy with the work with Vernonburg, and our numbers line up well. I have high confidence in your numbers.
Thank you.
Yeah, fabulous job. This is tremendous. Thank you, Vernonburg Group, all of you, and Lucy for coordinating. Just a tremendous job. Any other questions from board members?
I just think it's amazing how much information you guys have integrated in a relatively short time. Fantastic.
Thank you.
Well said.
A lot more work
So
to
if you-
do.
So if you have, Lucy, if I get this wrong, correct me, but if you have comments on this draft, they're seeking our input. What is the timeline to have comments? I know, Lucy, you said the board members can give comments in an extended frame, but are you looking for some date certain from us?
Yep. So if there's any comment that you feel you absolutely need to discuss with us prior to the posting of the rough draft for public comment, we need to have that conversation by the end of the day today. As far as comments, we will continue taking comments from board members as we take comments from the public as well. And the deadlines on that are the 5-year action plan has a shorter public comment period than the initial proposal volume 2. So the deadline for comments on the draft 5-year action plan is August 2nd. The deadline for comments on the draft initial proposal volume 1 is August 18th.
Okay. Thank you very much for repeating that. I appreciate that. All right, any other comments or feedback from the board? All right, hearing none. Thank you very much. This has been fantastic, and like has been said already, tremendous amount of information in these reports. Thank you very much for all your hard work.
Yeah, thank you. We'll excuse ourselves. Take care.
Okay,
Thank you all.
thank you. Next on our agenda is the workforce development proposal. Christine, I'd like to propose we move that item till after the NEK and the Maple Broadband so we can take action on the grants.
Yeah, that's fine, but I should tell you that everything's on hold with workforce development until you approve of that. So I hope we can get to it.
Okay.
Anyway,
I just want to make sure we take action on the grants. To me, that's paramount.
okay.
All right, let's take up NEK. Do we have a proposal presentation?
Yep, I will turn this over to NEK to speak. Go ahead, Krista.
Thank you. So I simply put together a slide with the high level statistics and can invite a conversation. So I will set up right now. I can't share, but it's fine. So there's our original construction grant allocation is for $65,321,000. Our
Christy, you can now share. Sorry, I didn't have you as a presenter.
It's okay. So our initial grant allocation was for 65 million. Our first award was for 15,899,000. And then our second award was for roughly 5 million. So to date, we have under contract $20,865,000. We're seeking a grant amendment request for $17,939,000. So that will bring our total contracted amount to 38,805,000. This funding represents roughly 500 miles of construction. It'll pass 6,700 premises, 4,538 of those are eligible addresses. The importance of our amendment is twofold. As you may recall, we underwent an extensive decision-making process around our design. in regards to whether or not we should move to the Corning FlexNAP process and whether or not that would have a substantial, i.e. tens of millions of dollars in positive impact. And we carried out that study with the assistance of the BCBB and the impact that it could have for other CUDs and decided that it would not. So our initial application phase was limited in miles until that decision was made. And we have been proceeding based on the pre-construction grant, right, with both design and with our make-ready applications. We actually have a substantial number of the miles already licensed and ready for construction in the areas that are inside of the construction grant amendment. And so it's really important for us that we be able to move now and quickly. One, so that we can retain crews that we were just told that we were going to get. And two, because we need to accelerate our pace of construction at a sufficient rate to ensure that we meet the end deadline of 2026 for spending the allocation to our CUD. So we are extremely cognizant of the importance of timing. It is taking some time to ramp up, but I feel confident that we'll be moving to a faster pace of construction, both because of the permits that are getting cleared out of the way. Some of them are long lead time permits with both railroad, Army Corps of Engineers. Like there's a number of different types of things that have to be done. Fortunately or unfortunately for us, we picked the area that has a river, a railroad, and an interstate as the first section that we were doing. So it's been that has caused a little bit of more delay, but we're getting through that. Those permits are secured. I'm happy to show you maps inside of executive session or to answer any questions, but the information is in your board packet.
So Krista, quick question. If we make a motion to approve the grant request subject to compliance with current and future BCBB policies, was that acceptable for approval of the grant?
So my concern, so you're asking is about putting in a blanket statement around future policies. And I'll give you an example.
And the caveat would be based on what you heard today in today's discussion. That's the structure of the policies. So just keep it in mind that that's the structure.
So I think it's important as we're doing this to understand where change may affect the reliance that we've made on a contract. And so, for example, there's a contract term for the third 30% that has slightly different language than the proposed term, but we've relied on the ability to get reimbursements in the third 30%. And what I mean by that is we have not engaged because of the cost and the expense, and because we don't need more money to spend right now, honestly. We have not engaged in additional financing that would enable us to have the cash flow to move to take that section of time that exists between when the 50% mileage is covered and when the additional funding is needed. So the original language in that grant contract, which is different than the one in your accountability proposal, is really critical. So I am willing to engage future policies in our grant contracts with the understanding that the policy is made by the board, and the grant contract that implements that policy is made by the staff with board advice or whatnot. But there's a difference between the policies, which yes, I agree to, and the grant and how those policies are implemented in the contract language. Does that make
So-
sense?
Go ahead, Holly.
Laura actually had her hand up first, so Laura, that's, if you
Sorry.
want to make a comment first.
Yeah, thanks, Krista. Just wondering with the flooding, have your plans been impacted at all?
So
Your routes? that
so
you're
we
aware of?
have so some of the routes that we have in play have been in flooded areas, and we are doing evaluation as to the status of those poles. But those areas also, the areas that were impacted haven't actually completed their make ready status. So that's okay. We've also, received a positive impact in that, we do have 2 crews that we're receiving because they can't do work because of the flooding in one of our adjoining CUDs. So it sort of cut both ways for us.
So
Oof.
I'm gonna go ahead, because that's actually not in the grant application realm. Everything you've said so far, I find confusing. So I'm going to try to do this in a block and tackle kind of way. With regard to policy, I don't think the board has proposed to amend existing grants. So to the extent that the payout schedule impacts your existing grant, I don't think you need to worry about that, but it would impact this grant and any future grant. And I really don't understand what you said about the third, we've been able to access funds in the last 30%. I don't know what it means, but what I'm gonna boil that down to is, and this is critical in my mind, is you have 20.8 million under contract. How much has been expended? How much have you received?
Yep, should have that. Hold on just a second. I don't have it off the top of my head, but
Yeah,
I
I
submitted a
understand.
report on it.
And of course, I'm just really interested in where are you with the existing grants before we add
Sure.
additional money?
Yeah. I think one of the key, so in construction grant 1, we have 2 of our OLTs where we haven't been able to secure locations for the cabinet, and so
I just want, like, where we have X amount of money. What was the date of that grant? Do you have that in front of you?
Yeah, and
the
please be
original one from
succinct.
April.
Krista, please be
April.
succinct, because we have Maple to deal with next, and we also have to get to the workforce development. So if you can just answer specifically and we'll move on.
So of the 15 million in that first grant, you have received.
I'm going to break it down for the grants get combined. So
Okay.
the amount, I'm not good at finding files under pressure. Hold on a second.
Yeah, I'm not even good
Everybody
at
is.
reading under pressure, so.
Yeah. So why don't I do this? Why don't I just ask somebody for them? Because I just had it. I just need to.
I would think staff might have this number too.
Yeah, it's in our last grant report. I just can't pull up Wise Hive at the moment.
Okay. And Can I ask a different question, or do you need a moment to deal with that?
No, I'll just answer the question generally. What's important to understand about what we're doing is that we're building the backbone throughout the network. And we added on to our existing network in the amended construction grant, the amendment to the first construction grant, we added on to that existing backbone. And then this is continuing the backbone. So it's really vital for us from a reliability and reliance standpoint, as well as an equity standpoint, to continue expanding that backbone throughout the rest of the areas. So that northwestern section, which will connect the state fiber networks together, and then the central section, which will finish our Ring 3. So those backbone connections are the primary importance of this area. And in addition, we're talking about trying to build up to 60 miles a month.
I hear you, but you're doubling the amount of money you're asking for under commitment. And what I hear you saying is it's focused on a backbone, right?
No, this one, there are pieces of this that are in the backbone, but if you look at what this does, it actually fills in the pieces, right? So if you look at construction, maybe it's easier to talk in executive session, but if you fill in the numbers for we're filling in the areas in construction grant 2. So for example, we had backbone that went through construction grant 2. Now we're filling in the areas that surround that backbone. That's the piece that we're adding in addition to the backbone in the other areas of the district. So first part is extend the backbone all throughout. The second part is to start filling out areas that are along the existing backbone. And, we're talking about something that will definitively get done within the next 2 years, and at least 170 miles of which are ready or imminently ready for build.
And you said that passes 6,000 locations, but only 400 are eligible?
No, I said 4,000.
Well, that's what I heard, because I wrote it down. 400 are eligible, 6,000 are passed.
4,538 are eligible.
Okay.
6,693 premises are passed. So
Okay.
in our construction,
I lost a 0 there someplace. Okay.
Okay. So
that's all I need to know. And my last comment on this is really this. There are attachments by CTC to this grant application in which they ask questions. And they ask a question and they provide the response of any K. But I can't tell whether it's an adequate response or even what the CTC conclusion is. So I'm left, and this is as much to Lucy and whoever is on the phone or not from CTC as anybody, to kind of wonder like, okay, well, those were good questions. Were those good answers? It just wasn't helpful.
So this is Celeste Freeman with CTC. So I can respond to that. So the responses were sufficient responses to the questions we were asking. And if you read the memo prior to, I just added the questions so that you would, if you had similar questions, you would also get the response. However, I can further clarify any specific questions that you have, but above that, we do say that it meets the requirements.
Okay, thank you.
But I'd be happy to talk through any items you'd like to discuss.
And the amount that we've spent cumulatively, thank you very much, Celeste, to date is $9,282,625.
So not quite half. But you're on
Correct.
target to complete that work of the first grant as amended within the 2-year window.
Definitively.
Thank you.
Okay, Laura?
Oh, sorry. Keeps telling me it's going to lower.
Do you have,
I
you don't
think
have questions?
to that point, we're in one of our municipal electric districts, we're struggling to get licenses through. I think it's a capacity issue and just there's a lot of work that needs to be done there. So that's why we're seeing licenses that have come green outside of our currently approved construction area, even though they're not, they're newer licenses, right? So part of this is really, you just have to be able to respond to what happens in the field. There's no.
All right, I'm gonna shut us down because we have
Yep.
so many things to move through. Are there any other board questions of the grant request from NEK? All right, I'm
I
gonna
have
put
one.
in, oh, sorry, go ahead, Dan.
And this is probably it's a very fine detail, but it's representative of a bunch of other things. Is Krista, there's one diagram, it's section 1, you show a donut, and I'm not going to name the roads, but you're not connecting to those, and the language isn't clear to me if these are, it's about a dozen or more addresses. Are these already served? You state they're not in the unserved addresses, but are they underserved? And why would you be skipping them? Just curious on that.
I've left them for BEAD funding.
Okay, thank you.
Any other questions? Thank you. I'm gonna put a motion on the table that we approve the NEK broadband grant request of $17,939,636. Subject to VCBB policies, including future policies. Is there a second?
Second.
Is there further discussion? Hearing none. All those in all those in favor, please say aye.
I'm in flavor.
I'm in flavor too.
Are you hungry, Patty?
Very. Any opposed? The ayes carry. Congratulations, Krista.
Super. Thank you all very much. Get back to it. Take care.
Thank you. Okay, that brings us to the Maple Broadband grant.
Okay, good afternoon, everyone. I'm going to share my screen, and I'm very aware, as you've mentioned a couple times, that we're pressed for time. So I'm going to keep this relatively brief in terms of comments, and then of course I'll entertain any questions that you folks have. The deck that I have here is substantially similar to the one that was in your board pack. So you guys will have the background in terms of what's going on with our district. So our planned phase 2 is shown here. So it's essentially the unserved areas in and around Virgins. As you can see, there's a number of unserved areas up to the northwest and northeast and to the south and southeast. So it's 88.7 miles, and there's a total of 612 unserved, underserved passings that are planned for this phase. So the specific grant request is 2.157 million, which is the remainder of our Act 71 allocation. Our previous grant from last year is 8.686 million. And this shows the stats that we're looking to increase the number of miles from 180.6 to 244.3, and the total number of addresses passed from 1188 to 2748. And this shows the new towns that we're building. So happy to take any questions.
Okay, questions of Ellie. Go ahead, Laura.
I'll ask you the same question, Ellie. Have you all been, or your construction plans been impacted by flooding?
Great question. We have not been impacted so far. We've been very lucky. This area of the state seems to have minimal impact. There has been some river flooding, but none that's affected our plant. Oh, and one thing I forgot to say, proactively answering a question that Holly may have. because in terms of how much money we've spent so far, we've spent just a little bit over 1.4 million, but we have close to 8 million, which is committed in terms of our construction contracts, as well as construction oversights and other materials purchased for this phase 2. So that's the reason for requesting the remainder of our allocation drawdown.
Because it's committed, just not spent, and you haven't submitted for the balance of the 8 million.
Correct. So we haven't, if you look at where we are, we've completed and lit 25.7 miles. We have another 130 that we're busy building now. We actually have more that we're going to be lighting hopefully later this month or early next month. But we have a whole bunch that's planned for later this year. So although we haven't spent a lot of money yet, there's a lot more money that we will be spending in the coming 6 months. And we don't have enough money in hand to be able to execute on a construction a construction agreement with a construction firm to be able to build out phase 2 unless we have the remainder of our allocation.
Ellie, if I make the same motion for you as I did for NEK, do you have any concerns with that you'd be subject to existing and future policy for VCBB?
No, I do not.
Okay. Dan, you have a question?
Yes, Ellie, I think it's clear, but I just want to be double check this, that all of the areas that GoNetspeed and Fidium has built on, you've reduced from your plant.
Yes.
So that we're not overbuilding and we're complementing what's been put out there.
That's correct. We've explicitly excluded all areas that are built with fiber currently, or that are that where Fidium share their build plans with us. So the areas that they said they've planned to build are excluded, and then all areas currently built with fiber, other than that, are excluded, as well as areas that are served 25.3 with DSL. Those are also excluded.
They are okay.
Yep, unless they're necessary to get from point A to point B, which is the case on a lot of roads, but we call them the Swiss cheese holes. So if they're not built by fiber, by the time BEAD comes around, we'll fill them in then.
Okay.
Thank you.
Holly, then Laura.
This is just, trying to correlate cost to cost. So in your first grant, as I back of the napkin, you're spending approximately 48,000 per mile. And in this grant, you're spending 33,000 per mile, almost 34,000 per mile. What's the basis of the differential?
The basis of the differential is that our actual construction costs are lower than what we expected. That's the main reason. And so we have some money left over projected at the end of phase 1. Not all of our costs are fixed. So our construction contract is relatively fixed, but of course, if the actual units built get changed, then the costs can go up and down. But other things are not necessarily fixed. For example, construction oversight is time and material, so that's a bit variable. But the short answer is the one I gave, which is that our actual construction costs were lower than projected, and so we updated our model to account for the actual costs we're seeing.
So I hate to do this to you, but it just needs to be asked. Should we be considering your net positive balance in your grant from round 1 against your costs in round 2?
We have done that already. Yes.
Yeah, and I wanted to add too that, just for clarification, their actual costs aren't 33,000, but because of the carryover, it causes this particular grant amendment to be reduced. So that really gets to what you're talking about, Holly. They're using some of the money that's existing to drive down the cost of this amendment.
So let it be said that the grant that was allocated in round 1 does not include the construction that's considered in round 2. So you can't just move money back and forth between these grants, as far as I'm concerned, unless we amend that first grant to move that money to the second grant.
Yes, that was my understanding. Oh, go ahead, Christine.
Yeah, this is a grant amendment. That's exactly what this is.
Yeah, but and it includes an amendment of the prior grant, exactly, is what I'm trying to say. So in Patty's question about policy, you're willing to adopt those policies into grant one.
We are. I mean, I think in practice, as a matter of practical fact, if you have policies such as the ones you've been describing, it would be difficult to impossible to enforce them differently across different portions of the network. So that's a distinction without a difference in my mind.
Exactly.
Thank you.
Well said. Any more questions of Ellie? All right, I'm going to put a motion on the table that we approve the Maple Broadband grant request of $2,157,386, subject it to being consistent or subject to VCBB current and future policy. Is there a second?
Second.
Thank you, Holly. Any discussion? Hearing none. All those in favor, please say aye.
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 Aye. Any opposed? The ayes carry. Congratulations.
Thank you very much.
Okay. It is 11:19. Christine, I think we have time for the workforce development grant. You want to tee that up?
Yeah, I think this is really straightforward. You know, we put together the workforce development team almost 2 years ago, and been working on this process of creating an apprenticeship program and a training program, and now a career development program. We didn't actually ask for this grant. I testified after a crossover last year, thinking no money, you know, there was no hope, but brought up the issue of workforce development. And then the legislature gave a grant to the state university system to provide $513,000 specifically for our program. So we've been working closely. Things have been going really great. You know, Pat Moulton's been doing a great job, Sarah Ballou, but all of a sudden they lost part of their staff. So this thing went to a screeching halt, and Pat said, we can't do this grant anymore. Now we're required to do it anyway for the BEAT program. And, you know, we've got a little more work to do, but not much work to do to get this grant, the workforce development plan, to modify to meet the BEAT program. So the fact that we have $513,000 added to our budget to do what we're going to do already seems to be it seems to be a good idea. So I don't really see any downside to this. I've been doing the bulk of the work so far. I can continue to do and lead that effort. I've got some help now with Chance and Stephen coming on board. So from a staff standpoint, you know, we've discussed this thoroughly with staff, recognizing that I'll keep doing the bulk of the work on this. So my request is for the board to actually, by the way, I also, in background, we reached out to Community College of Vermont Department of Labor to see if they could assume the grant. Nobody has resources right now. So this program, unfortunately, we're at the point where we're actually setting up. We had actually started scheduling train the trainer programs and the kicking off training, but all that's ground to a halt. So we're kind of stopped dead in our tracks right now. Now, you know, we'll move forward if the board doesn't approve us accepting this grant. We're going to move forward anyway and restart and continue and do the bulk of the work ourselves, because it's required by BEAD. But I'm just asking the board to approve the acceptance of this grant. The Department of Labor has already said they're willing to turn it over to us as well. And Laura, go ahead.
Laura, you have questions?
Yeah, so who is actually doing the training?
The training is being done. So we've contracted, we've got contractors lined up for the training and the program. So we've got the training being carried out by the Fiber Broadband Association. And that we're using their training package. And we've got the Wireless Infrastructure Administration already manages these apprenticeship programs. So we've got them identified as contractors to do that work as well. That's all a continuation.
And these certifications, Christine, is that is OPR? Have they weighed in on all this?
Who's OPR?
Office of Professional Regulation, Secretary of State's office.
Thank you.
Well, we can reach out to them. They're federally certified programs, but so if you put
Okay.
that as a, yeah. We
It
could
does
do that.
seem like it would probably be
I assume
not
they,
unhelpful. It wouldn't be
yeah.
unhelpful to reach
Right,
out to them.
I'll be glad to do that.
Holly? I'm sorry, Laura, are you finished or?
I
Do you have
think
more
that
questions?
I really would like us to reach out to OPR if we don't have any of the educational institutions willing to kind of lead this. And I heard you say you'd be happy to do that, Christine, so.
Yes, I'd be happy to.
I have no
Holly?
more questions.
So when you say, Christine, that you're going to go ahead and do this anyway, even if you don't do it with this $500,000, my question to you is this $500,000 worth of state money that could be used for some other purpose, some other time? And we could fill in this activity with bead money. I mean, we need to be good stewards of the money. So I'm a little confused by the comment. So just help straighten me out here.
Well, we're trying to keep all of the money we can for infrastructure. So of course we could turn the money back, but that means we pull back another $500,000 from infrastructure to make it happen.
When we get bead money in the future. Yeah. So it's not,
well, not really, because we'll have to stop the program for about a year. If we don't get this grant, we'll actually halt the program for a year. And that puts us another year behind in terms of training and certifying employees. And I know that that's, some of the CUDs have some very big concerns about getting workforce.
I'm really just clarifying the record here. That was a good answer. We need to approve this now because otherwise we're waiting a whole year to initiate or continue this training program that we had planned to do. So without it, there is no training program for a year. Is that right?
That's correct.
Thank you.
Thank you for that clarification, Holly. Dan or Brian, do you have questions?
I guess if nobody else is jumping in and just one other little thought, there's $250,000 worth of supplies indicated in the grant allocation. Is that because we're buying little pieces of network for everybody to train on, or what is that huge amount?
That is actually the safety gear required to be part of the apprentice program. So we're purchasing the safety gear for the employee. That's it. It's, that's in the grant. We didn't write the grant, but that's part of the program.
Okay, so they go home. So the people that are involved go home with state purchased safety gear.
Yeah, the agreement is they go right into work after this. They go into a 2,000-hour certified president. So yeah.
Right. But yeah. Thank you. And I'm sorry, I have one more. And how many trainees do you hope I know it's in there somewhere. How many trainees do you hope to complete the program?
Oh, I don't remember the number. I think it was a reasonable number. I think we had 75 entering the program and 45 or something like that. I made sure that number was reasonable. We actually, for the plan, we need to train about 600 to ongoing. But we kept the grant number very reasonable and achievable. So I think it was 75 entering the program with a 50% throughput rate. So
it's about 11 grand per completion.
Yeah, that sounds about right. Yep.
Christine, what is the exact grant number? 516 million.
516,000, right?
I'm sorry. Yeah. 516,000. It's over there with flavor.
Yeah, right. I know we're used to talking about millions, but this one's 5.
Any other questions? I put a motion on the table that we approve the acceptance of a grant from the Vermont State University of 516,000, subject to Christine pursuing the OPR certification, Office of Professional, what's the R stand for?
Regulation.
Office of Professional Regulation. Is there a second?
Second.
Thank you, Holly. Any further discussion? All those in favor, please say aye.
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 Aye. Dan, are you
Where-
on?
How
Dan?
about Brian?
Brian's in a meeting.
Brian's in
Uh-oh.
well, the three of us suffice.
Okay, Brian, are
that's-
you on? Right, just let the minutes note that Brian and Dan are not in attendance right now. But it still carries, motion carries.
Thank you.
Congratulations.
Thank you. Well done, board. Because I can't believe you pulled the whole agenda off at this point. So amazing.
All right. I would like to juggle our agenda a little bit, and I want to do Vikuda update and then public comment. And then after those two, we'll go to staff updates and then parking lot.
Did you say Vikuda update first?
Yes.
Oh,
Vikuda
thank you.
update.
Yeah, that works. That's what we would hope for. Thanks.
Okay. Rob?
Thank you. Well, again, thank you for the great progress on a number of things. I think, just to set the stage for a number of updates for me, we kind of see the next few months as really critical to setting the stage for the next 5 years. And, the amazing work that Vernonburg and the staff have been doing on the BEAD plans, I think you can equate to the work that went into drafting Act 71. This is not anything other than a whole new program that we're inventing to spend the next 50% of the funds for Vermont. And so, getting the value system and the intent of what was worked into Act 71 worked into BEAD, as particularly Volume 2 gets written, is really critical. And so the public comment process that's opening up is really important. For information, VCBB sent out a 52-question RFI a month or so ago. Vikuda responded with 43 pages of comments to those 52 questions, and frankly, we were concise. But there is a lot of detail and nuance in the way these programs need to be implemented in order to protect the public trust and make sure we maintain the community broadband aspects of the programs through BEAD. Vikuda also sent out a RFP for a strategist to assist with BEAD commentary and to help the CUDs with that. And we have a contractor that we are planning to bring in August as a shared service to help us through both the comment period for Volume 2 with some expertise of the way the NTIA thinks about these things, as well as to help us through the application process and the competitive grant process that'll play out next spring. I would just say that this is really great. All the commercial sector folks have teams of people working on how they're going to work on these grant programs, and we have our community sourced expertise, and we'll have one professional resource to help with that. So we're grateful for the resources to help do that. We accepted an offer yesterday afternoon for an associate program coordinator. So that will be a full-time staffer joining Vikuda in mid-August. And that's kind of the first piece of the shared services infrastructure that we're working on. Finance Committee is working on a request for information related to the shared treasurer and some of the financial support services, as well as HR as an expanded scope we've added to that. And I think we're making good progress there. We were thinking that we would just go straight to an RFP, but as the group thought about it, frankly, there's some structural work to do, and we thought the RFI process would allow us to learn more as opposed to going right to an award. In policy and legislation, we are starting to have a number of conversations about financing that matches up to both the letter of credit and the minimum 25% match criteria for BEAD. We're talking about legislation for 2024. And of course, reactions to the 5-year plan and Volume 1 and the challenge process. In the area of Make Ready, we have received a draft MOU from Green Mountain Power related to the tariff rider credit extension, which is up next March. And we have replied with comments. We think it's a really constructive set of agreements that will increase the partnership between Green Mountain Power and the CUDs. And so that's not done yet, but it's really on a good track in terms of creating some new opportunities, extending the tariff rider credit, and increasing the way that tariff rider credit can be used across make-ready applications. Construction continues apace. I think you heard some of that in what Ellie and Krista shared, but in other places as well, we're hearing really great progress. I know that you probably saw that DV Fiber hired a new construction manager, and CV Fiber is going as well. Laura, to your question about storm damage, I don't have a comprehensive view. I do know that there are instances where fiber across bridges, where the bridge was washed out, have happened. There are places where pole lines were undermined. And the way that restoration works is the poles have to get restored, or the pathway has to get restored, power has to restore, and then we go after power. So we are aware of some frustrated customers from here and there where that restoration is taking longer than anyone would want. One of the notes I saw just talked about how long the crews are working, and doing their best to do that as fast as they can. I guess the last comment relates back to the accountability policy and the BEAD Volume 1 and Volume 2 comments. These are, I think, new programs. They are absolutely aligned and critical to achieving the joint mission that we all have together. And we're really eager to engage on them. Our perspective, of course, is that we have, in the absence of large staff or populations, our solution is to bring great minds together. And it's messy. We've gotten great results from it when we've allowed it to play out. So we're looking forward to that on both BEAD and finishing up the policy stuff. I tried to do that as quickly as I could. I sometimes talk too fast, but thank you for the chance to provide an update.
It was great, Rob. Thank you very much. That was great. Any questions of Rob? All right, let's go to public comment. Christine or Rob Fisk, do you want to run?
Yep, I'll take it. Go ahead. So anyway, for public comment, we allow everybody 3 minutes to make a comment, and raise your hand if you'd like to make a comment. And we'll call on you in the order that you raise your hand. So anybody want to make a public comment, please raise your hand and we'll recognize you. I don't see any hands coming up. I'll kind of say going once, going twice, going 3 times. Okay, let's move on.
All right. Let's do staff updates, and then I do want to hit the parking lot, just go over a summary of what we have on the parking lot.
Okay, why don't we, we'll be crisp with our staff updates. We'll start with Tony. Go ahead, Tony.
Hi, Christine. Well, I would like just a couple minutes of the board's time in executive session to discuss the BEAD program and their role with respect to same.
Oh, are we going to be able to pull that off, Rob Fish, in the few minutes that we have left?
I don't see how we would pull that off in the few minutes we have left if we are ending at noon.
Yeah.
And I'd really like to
eliminate?
stay.
Could we?
I'd really
I'm
like to
sorry.
stay in the public purview, unless it's something of litigation or something that meets the standard of executive session.
Or personnel.
For personnel, thank you.
Or
Okay,
contract
so
negotiation.
And if
So
you,
not-
if Tony, you really think we need executive session, let's talk about it.
no, it's just
Yeah.
okay.
Yeah,
It's just advice.
Yeah, logistically, we can't pull it off for this meeting. So.
Well, I want to know if it's urgent though, because
Right.
if it's a gating issue for our continued activity, we should hear Tony. And if you really think it's like, here's your option. Does it have to be an executive session? It is legal advice, but is it confidential advice?
Right, exactly. And I prefer we stay and be transparent as much as we can. That's the better way to proceed.
Okay, I'm not sure which way to go on this. I'm not used to giving advice in a public session. It's not that there's any litigation concern or anything. It really is just it's a recommended actions for the board.
All right, let's stay in public session, and if we feel like we're crossing a boundary, we'll call it and move.
Okay, great. So what I would like to recommend is that the board essentially adopt each of the, right now there's 3 and ultimately there'll be 4, a final proposal, but the 5-year plan, the initial proposal, volume 1 and 2, and then it'll be the final proposal. But each one of these particular deliverables is going to ultimately constitute this new program that the board is going to be administering. And so based on the board's authority under 8084A to have the approval authority with respect to program design, I think it's imperative for the board to do more than just provide comments, but to actually have a formal adoption of each of these deliverables. And so given the short timeline on the 5-year plan, which is really, you know, kind of a high level overview type document. However, it does include the basic objectives of the program, which are then going to be incorporated in the initial proposal. It would be, I would like the board to pay, you know, to give some feedback if there is any feedback, but to pay particular importance, attention to the 5-year plan, the overall objectives. They're on page 19 in particular. Just make sure the board is in agreement with what we have down there. And perhaps the board can approve an email approval of the final deliverables so that you don't have to have separate board meetings if there are not any critical comments or feedback that has come through from the board to staff.
I know it's been said 6 times today, but when does approval of the 5-year plan need to happen?
Well, I believe, and we can refer this to Lucy, but I believe she said it was going to be submitted to the NTIA on the end of August.
Yeah,
So
it's
that
August.
So we
It's
have we have a meeting on the 28th and we have an August meeting in which to approve it.
August 14.
Yeah, that would
So
work. Yeah.
the timeline is such that we won't have the final draft at the point of the August meeting, and submission is to the NTIA is due prior to the September meeting on August 28th.
And couldn't you change it so you do have the document prepared by the August meeting? That's what you should do.
We won't be able to give the full amount of time to public comment period, and I think it's important to us that there's time for public comment.
Well, I appreciate Tony's advice that this is actually the board's decision on the plan, and that's appropriate subject matter for our agenda. If the timeline on the plan didn't allow for adequate public comment, that's a problem that should be dealt at staff level. But there is time for public comment, correct, Lucy?
Yes, in our current timeline, we have time for public comment and then time to incorporate public comment prior to creating the final draft that we submit to the NTIA.
Could we have a special board meeting in August to discuss this? Because I think, you know, Lucy, how much time have we allocated for public comment at this point?
So for the 5-year plan, it's 14 days. For each of the initial proposals, it's 30 days.
But for this particular August 28th, what do we
14
need?
days.
14 days. So
is what
And
we've
how many
allocated.
days to incorporate comments?
I
mean, it's just a question of where can you cut some time out?
can tell you that we have we've tightened the timeline as smushed as we can possibly make
But
it.
you didn't tighten it with the objective of the board approving the plan on
Yeah,
August
let's,
14th.
I think let's have a special meeting. It'd be a brief hour meeting. Specifically on this one item where we don't load it up, just be very, very specific so we can fit it in.
Yeah, I think that's, to me, that feels like the best answer. So
So
we'll
that's
pick a
got to
time.
be a meeting that happens between the 14th and the what, Lucy? 20th?
It's going to have to happen in the few days preceding the 28th. So really, it's going to have to happen shortly before the 28th.
All right, if Rob can send out a doodle poll for that week of the 21st to the 25th. A 1 hour meeting just for the 5-year plan.
I mean, okay.
Yeah, that seems doable.
Patty, I would really like, though, us to take note of Tony's advice that the board makes decisions on plans and policies like this, and that all timelines for everything have to include opportunity for the board to both review and deliberate and decide.
It's good feedback. Agreed.
Okay, that's it. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Tony.
Oh, should I also go into Lucy? Do you want to discuss the pre-construction issue with? Or do you want to do that?
Is that a contractual?
Well, it is I think we need board approval for this, so.
Or yeah, Christine, where do you want to go next with staff updates?
I don't know. I wasn't paying attention. We're doing some text about getting the meeting going. Anyway, Steph, are you done, Lucy?
I can go next with staff updates.
Oh, yeah, that's right. That's right. Yeah, you go next. I see what the question is. Thank you. Go ahead.
Okay, so communication union districts updates. We are expecting up to 4 applications for the August meeting. So we're working with CUDs that are working towards applications on the August meeting. Those
For
applications.
grant applications?
Yes, construction grant applications.
Thank you.
Those applications are due on July 31st to VCBB in order to give time for staff review and CTC review. We had a question come to us from a CUD that may require, we're kind of looking into it more, it may require a conversation at the next meeting, which is about if there's a possibility to transfer money from their pre-construction allocation into their construction allocation. So we're kind of looking into that as staff and seeing if there's any precedent or direction one way or another. And there's a possibility that we might need to come to the board for direction on that.
I think you do have to come to the board.
Yes,
How
you do.
Not only do you have to come to the board, the criteria on which that money was granted for pre-construction is completely different from construction.
Exactly.
So, and it may not even be allocable to that CUD. That's not the CUD's money. That's the CUD's money for a particular purpose.
Right.
Okay. Got it. We can move on. Is that all, Lucy?
Yeah, I think Rob is next, perhaps.
Yep, go ahead, Rob.
Sure, thank you. I'm just going to give a few quick updates first on staffing. That's been a big story for this month. As Christine noted at the beginning, we're welcoming Stephen as our broadband project developer, Chance as our administrative services 3, and Brittany as our digital equity officer. Because of the time constraints, we want to do a more formal introduction at probably the next board meeting where they can introduce themselves. I think that probably makes sense at this point.
Yeah, good idea.
Other updates, we officially received our rejection letter from the NTI Middle Mile grant program. At this point, it was expected. We are still waiting to do a feedback session with the NTIA to find out exactly why. Our initial impression is most of the grants that were approved had well over 50% match, which was way in excess of what was required, but we want to confirm that and get feedback before we figure out our next step. This does open up the question of in the Budget Adjustment Act last year, 30 million was provided for the middle mile or other federal programs as match. So we are examining any changes that would be required or ways to leverage those funds to solve some of the other issues related to BEAD potentially. Also, in regard to those other issues regarding BEAD with the letter of credit, proposal that we had submitted to the treasurer for the local investment advisory committee, it's not going to be evaluated as a result of the funding. They're switching their focus entirely to housing and to flood relief, which is understandable. But it was one of our contingencies. So we are continuing to explore a variety of different options, and it could be an option of going to that program later in the fall potentially, but that's off the table at this point.
So Rob, just so I'm keeping the playbook straight. So you need that letter of credit in order to access BEAD funding for construction, correct?
Yes, subrecipients will need a letter of credit or the functional equivalent to access the BEAD funding, to really even to be able to apply. It's a gatekeeping criteria that we're of the opinion that it severely limits the ability for public entities and small entities to participate, and making that very loud and clear.
Yeah, yeah, but it's not regarding the DEI funding. It's just, it is specific to the BEAD, the construction, BEAD construction funding.
Yes, we have not seen the restrictions or even the application yet for the competitive digital equity funding.
Right. Thanks.
Okay,
That's everything at this point.
thanks. Ready to go into parking lot.
All right, let's
We have
go.
Heron first.
Oh, Heron, sorry, go ahead, Heron.
That's okay. I'll keep it quick. We have had a lot of media attention, and since our last meeting in June, we had several stories about our listening sessions we held across the state. We got a lot of coverage on our $229 million federal BEAD allocation. I think I counted 16 separate stories. And then there was also a lot of media attention for EC Fiber's celebration of completing the network in their 23 original towns. So a lot of good stuff out there, and I'll finish up with that.
Okay, we're set to move on. Let's go to let's go to parking lot.
All right. I have a long list, so bear with me. If I miss anything, hopefully folks can fill in blanks. First on my list is ex parte communication. I'm going to review Robert's Rules of Order on that. Assign that one to me. Leading indicators of construction status subcommittee, construction standards. I think Dan Nelson is going to be that. He's not
And
here.
it
We'll
should
assign.
include it should include open architecture policy.
Thank you. Staff presents their process and amend to reflect new policy for give me a second here. For construction meeting grant conditions. I'm sorry, that's cryptic, but
yeah, that was around what Dan brought up around construction requirements. Yeah.
Well, and actually, Patty, I don't know if you want to break it down or if you want to just generalize it as a bucket of, we need, once these policies are passed, we need staff process descriptions for each policy.
yes, exactly. I also have staff is going to prepare an annual report submission list. What would be in an annual report?
For the criteria in the policy, such as operating standards and reliability. I'm just going to say such as, so that we don't.
Okay. Okay.
have to go through it here.
And again, don't think that all of these are going to get done with a snap of a finger, but we just need to put them on a list so that we can keep track of it all. I have sign-off sheet that VCBB can operate a system in the event of a failure to comply.
It's actually an agreement.
Okay, sign
Right.
off agreement. Let's see, this is under authorized ownership transfers. That the lien, a segment of the network, not just the drop section.
We need to prepare a form of lien.
Yes, thank you. I know this is cryptic, but you can fill it.
Yeah.
Sunset provision of the VCBB subcommittee to address that.
Mm-hmm.
I'm happy to work on that.
Okay, awesome, thank you. Universal service report to legislature include.
Yeah, that's in the policies. What that
Listed
it's got to
policy
include universal service
and geographic
report
diversity.
and geographic diversity, right? Good.
Okay.
Good job.
Consumer standards, this is under consumer standards certificates. Create a format for CUDs to certify service quality standards. That's a subcommittee. I'll
Yep.
volunteer to be on that.
Operating standards.
Yep. For under affordability, included in annual report standards for affordability, how to address the affordability piece.
I'll be on that subcommittee.
Excellent. I think that's all I have. Have I missed anything?
Yeah, I've got a subcommittee to address, my note has to address open architecture.
That got rolled into Dan Nelson's subcommittee on engineering standards.
Okay, and then safety needs to be rolled into that as well.
Yes, thank you.
Yep, okay, got it.
Excellent, well done.
Yeah, well done, board. I was very impressed. And staff,
Um,
thank you, staff.
Yes, well done, everybody. Last item on our list is confirming our next regular scheduled meeting is August 14th. In addition, we'll have the July 28th meeting. August 14th, we'll move back to the noon to regular time, noon to 4. And our August 28th meeting will be at 8 o'clock in the morning.
Yeah, 8 to 11, yep.
8 to 11. Okay, we met the time, unbelievable.
July 28th meeting will be 8
Yeah,
to
July
11.
20th, 8 to
Did I
11.
say, sorry, July 28th, sorry,
That's okay.
with flavor.
Nice job, Patty.
Thank you all. Nice job, everyone. I move we adjourn. Is there a second?
My day to second everything.
Excellent.
And
All
I'm
those
in flavor.
All those in flavor, please say aye.
Bye.
Aye. We are adjourned. Thank you, everybody. Great meeting.
Bye-bye.
Thanks again, Tony.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye.